As a result of stress, rising culinary star Martin Lee lost the ability to taste. Experts recommended fresh air and peace, so he went to the distant mountains where his relative used to live in one of the villages. Having found a beautiful place, the main character stopped for a picnic. He took with him the essentials for preparing delicious food. A few minutes later, the meat was frying in the pan, spreading delicious aromas throughout the area. The young man watched his favorite process with satisfaction. It was possible to relax, and a can of beer was perfect for this. Martin remembered how he came to his grandfather's abandoned house, which turned out to be a passage to another world. And that's how his adventures and meeting new friends began. Giant Francis was the captain of the knights of the local town. Several different races lived in this place, including beastmen or werewolves. Little Luna often ran away from home. Her guard, Liam, had to find the bully and return her to her mother. The magician and sorcerer Janice was an alchemist and lived in the City of People. The third side of another world was owned by an elven civilization. The first acquaintance of the main character was Abigail with her bird. Martin encountered all these interesting creatures during his journey to the beautiful mountain landscapes. It all started when a young man, in search of silence, went to a distant village to restore his nerves and health after winning numerous competitions of famous chefs of the world. The building of the former tea house stood empty for many years after the death of his grandfather, and the main character decided to stay here. At Martin's request, his old friend and manager Dennis took him to a remote place. The main character was afraid to get out of the car until he was sure that there was no one nearby. The young man was so tired of the sudden popularity after winning the show that he imagined journalists on every corner constantly pursuing him. Martin was reassured by his friend's words that no one would go into the wilderness, and he took off his mask. The young man stood at the door of his new life and remembered the moments of glory. Martin Lee recently became the most popular chef. He was recognized everywhere. The young man graduated from one of the best culinary schools in the world and won international competitions in Paris. They tried to invite him to all the shows and programs. It seemed that a bright future awaited the young, talented professional. However, Martin was very worried about his popularity. His fans did not allow him to work in peace, constantly distracting him and following him everywhere. Envious colleagues reproached the talented chef for having developed a star fever and for treating them with disdain. Numerous rumors about the young chef's misbehavior and poor professionalism were spread on social media, with one of the sources of gossip being his colleague and former friend Warren. Martin was under constant stress, tired of his sudden popularity and false rumors. The mountain village was a great place to relax. The main character decided to go there to recover and hide from prying eyes. In order not to waste time and continue his favorite business, the young man wanted to open a small home restaurant. Before they started unpacking, the friends decided to have a snack. On the way, the guys stopped at a cafe and ordered food to go. For the first time in a long time, Martin ate food that someone else had cooked. Dennis watched his friend closely. The smell was disgusting. The main character was ready to kill whoever could ruin the spaghetti like that. The young man took a chance to try the dish. The most important result of the stress was that Martin lost the ability to taste, especially of his own food, which was what worried the young chef the most. Out of frustration that he couldn't fully experience the dish, the main character broke the plate. The young man consulted many specialists, but the doctor's verdict was the same. Psychological trauma was the cause. Doctors advised getting rid of the source of stress and finding another hobby. However, Martin loved to cook and he didn't want to change anything. Dennis didn't like his friend's decision to stay in the wilderness. The main character did not agree. He really liked the mountains and the silence. After saying goodbye to Dennis and taking the advice of doctors, Martin set off on a hike. The taxi was supposed to take him closer to the peaks. The young man wondered if he had taken everything he needed for the camping trip. The driver watched the strange young man closely. The taxi driver was surprised that the guy was going to the mountains in light clothes and without a tent. The main character asked to stop the car near an abandoned village. The houses were empty. There had been no one left in the small village for a long time. Martin was here for the first time in several years. He had not come here since his grandfather died. The young man decided to tidy up the old house a little. The young man was surprised that the door to the barn was open. Coming closer, the main character saw a strange light in the depths of the pantry. Martin prepared to fight off the would-be thief, holding a sturdy bag for kitchen tools and utensils. Suddenly, something moved in the bushes, causing the young man to scream in fear. The cute ginger cat was happy to meet a person. The young man calmed down. From the look of the village, it seemed that there had been no people here for a long time. The main character went inside the barn to find the switch. Something alerted Martin. The room seemed very large to him. The young man carefully moved into the depths of the utility room. After some time, the young man felt a breath of wind. What he saw ahead shocked the famous chef. The main character stood on the edge of a huge abyss, a strange glow surrounding him. His foot slipped off the cliff and Martin fell screaming. The young man continued to fly for several seconds, not imagining what awaited him ahead. After some time, the young man woke up and opened his eyes. The main character was lying on the grass, with branches of huge, beautiful trees hanging over him. Something wet and warm touched my hand. Martin screamed loudly in horror and jumped up. The small, furry animal looked at the stranger with surprise. Suddenly, the squirrel-like creature spread its large ears and flew away. The main character watched the flight with curiosity. He had never seen such animals before. Something moved in the nearby bushes, causing Martin to flinch again. There was a small bunny sitting nearby in the grass. When the fluffy bunny stood up, he looked like a giant monster from a horror movie. Fortunately, the unknown beast did not pay attention to the young man and calmly jumped on. Martin was shocked and ran. It was necessary to urgently find a way out of this dangerous, mysterious place. Evening came and the main character realized that he was completely lost. The young man decided to look for a place to spend the night. The young man began to unpack his magic travel bag. The first thing the main character did was make a fire. Martin looked at the flames. There was not a soul around, and there was no connection either. Feeling hungry, the cook decided to do his favorite thing. The young man had taken some food supplies in advance to make it easier to cope in field conditions, but now the bag contained only mushrooms and butter. The main character had to use what he had in his reserves. After a few minutes, the dish was ready, but there was no spices or salt at all. Martin looked at his creation with disbelief, doubting that it could be eaten. There was no other food, so I had to try what I could get. The famous chef was completely upset. He still couldn't feel the taste. The frying pan with mushrooms flew to the side. The young man was ready to cry from despair. The main character was surrounded on all sides by powerful tree trunks. The flames of the fire warmed and calmed the young man a little. Suddenly there was a cracking sound of branches. Martin shuddered in fear and looked around cautiously. The glowing lights of the eyes of unknown animals looked at their prey. The creatures came very close and resembled wolves. The only weapon the young man found on himself was a small folding knife. The predator in the bushes opened its mouth with powerful fangs and prepared to jump. The main character could already feel his breath next to him. Martin grabbed the blade and prepared to defend himself, screaming loudly to try to scare away the terrible beasts and closing his eyes in horror. It became quiet. The young man sat motionless, shaking all over with fear. After some time, the young man decided to open his eyes, surprised that nothing had happened and he was still alive. There was nothing around. All the toothy predators were gone. Martin heard sounds nearby that resembled loud chomping. The young man looked carefully in the direction from which the strange noise was coming. A small fluffy animal was licking an empty frying pan. The baby looked at the young man and wagged his tail in greeting. Martin couldn't figure out what kind of animal it was. The white, shaggy creature looked most like a puppy. The beast's huge blue eyes looked joyfully at the stranger. The dog barked and went about his usual business. The main character tried to determine the breed, not understanding where the baby came from in the forest. The puppy began to show signs of attention to his new friend. A few moments later, the fluffy lump was already sitting in Martin's arms, who had previously disliked dogs and did not understand why everyone considered them the cutest creatures. The young man noticed that the dog's fur was very coarse, probably because it was wild. The young man looked closely at the shaggy stranger. A guess occurred to the main character. Apparently, there was a small wolf in front of him. Martin imagined with horror that somewhere nearby there was a she-wolf lurking and coming for her cub. The young man was afraid to think what would happen to him if the predator decided that he had kidnapped the baby. It was quiet all around. The fluffy lump sat calmly in the arms of his new friend. The main character was very tired from a busy day and went to bed. The young man no longer cared at all whether he would die of hunger or be eaten by predators, and he fell asleep. In his sleep, Martin felt himself being pulled somewhere by his shirt. The young man had no strength left to resist, and after a while the movement stopped. Martin opened his eyes and tried to get up. The wolf cub dragged him to the magical abyss into which he had fallen. The main character did not know whether he would be able to return home or whether he would end up in some other world again. The furry little boy watched as his friend hesitated to make a choice. The white lump knew the outcome and boldly rushed to help Martin. The wolf cub ran and pushed the doubting boy into the abyss. During the flight, the young man thought that he might again end up in a dangerous place or simply crash. The puppy calmly watched his friend fly away into the distance. The movement stopped. Martin felt something hard underneath him and decided to open his eyes to look around. The young man saw that he was sitting in a familiar village next to his grandfather's barn. The young man could not believe that he had returned safe and sound. The main character tried to get up, remembering that he didn't even thank his shaggy friend. Hearing a familiar bark, Martin looked around. The contented puppy was sitting nearby and happily wagging its ears. This is how the young chef got a furry pet. At home, the young man tried to wash his shaggy friend, who deftly ran away from the water. It was necessary to choose a nickname, and after numerous attempts, the wolf cub received the name Charlie. The baby slept on the bed with his friend. Martin felt warm and calm when the white lump was nearby. The next morning, the main character woke up feeling refreshed. The young man was surprised. For the first time in several months, he managed to get enough sleep. It was time to start cleaning, but first Martin wanted to pick out some food for Charlie. The baby categorically refused dog food. Food for cats and other pets was also rejected. The upset protagonist went to the kitchen. The young man made himself breakfast. He still didn't feel anything, but at least he enjoyed the process. Martin ate the food in front of him with disappointment, hoping that the taste would be restored someday. Charlie quickly jumped onto the table and began to eat human food with great pleasure. The main character tried to drive away the bully. The young man noticed that his shaggy friend ate only the dishes he had prepared without touching the semi-finished products from various companies. The young man began to analyze the situation. Martin gave Charlie a choice of 2 steaks with different sauces to confirm his guess. The cook took good meat and cooked it the same way. The only difference was in the gravy. Charlie sniffed the store-bought sauce cautiously. The chef watched what the baby would choose. The puppy began to eat meat with store-bought gravy, waving his luxurious tail with pleasure. The second plate featured Martin's signature sauce, which he developed himself and won a special prize. Charlie swallowed the second piece at high speed, his tail still wagging in delight. The contented animal licked its lips peacefully after a delicious meal. Martin realized with satisfaction that this was an unusual animal and that he would not be able to feed it just anything. It was necessary to start renovating the building in order to open a restaurant, so the main character went to paint the walls. The young man didn't really like the result. The color was not at all what he wanted. A well-fed Charlie lay quietly nearby watching his friend. An elderly man suddenly approached from behind and explained that this was paint for interior use and therefore not suitable for the exterior walls of the building. Martin was scared. He didn't know who he was talking to, again remembering the journalists. The stranger introduced himself as the village elder. Henry Brown did not wait for the young man to come to him for an introduction and went to the meeting himself. The elder looked at the painted facade with displeasure. The result was disappointing. The man noticed the furry animal. Henry promised to send helpers and tried to pet the puppy, but it deftly eluded strangers' hands. Martin wanted to refuse outside help, hoping that he could handle the repairs himself. However, the headman categorically ordered not to touch the paint. On the weekend, he would bring a specialist who would help the young man. The main character had no choice but to agree with the elder's decision. Several days passed. Martin was busy sorting out the dishes and relaxing, admiring nature. Early in the morning on a day off, Henry came to the young man with an assistant. The farmer's son, Adam Lee, brought the necessary tools. The chef watched the specialist's work carefully. Martin was left with only minor errands to run, and he couldn't understand why strangers were helping him. The headman and Adam tried to correct the mistakes and repaint the house. Henry asked the new owner what would happen here. Rumors were talking about a new restaurant. The young chef said that he plans to prepare European cuisine, mainly Italian. The farmer was interested in the menu and asked if there would be pork cutlets, which his wife Grace loved so much. During the break, the men sat at the table talking about their dreams. Adam's wife was pregnant. The nearest cafe had long since closed, and her husband was unable to cook her favorite dish. Martin hadn't planned to include cutlets on the menu, but they weren't difficult to make. The chef thought about the possibility of preparing food to order in the future, but he was afraid that he could not try what he made for his customers. Charlie seemed to read his friend's thoughts and immediately reminded him of himself. The beast seemed to say that it would help and was happy to taste the food. The main character thought this was a way out of the temporarily established situation. Martin promised Adam to make pork cutlets for Grace. The young man was glad to be of service to his assistants. In the evening, the young chef began the experiment. He had previously asked the man in detail about the taste of the product and the sauce that was served in the village cafe. The main character was glad that he could take up his favorite business again. The furry friend sat nearby and waited for everything to be ready. Martin felt a surge of energy and was ready to experiment until he got a positive result. The knife was flying in the hands of the famous chef. All the ingredients were collected. After a while, a fragrant smell spread throughout the kitchen. The cutlets looked delicious. Charlie got the first portion. His tale was the quality control of the product. Martin noted with disappointment that the furry object's movements were slow, which meant the taste was weak. In the next batch, the chef changed the composition of the sauce so that it was less sweet. However, the tail was still almost motionless. Charlie, with his belly full, could no longer move, but the experiment continued. After losing his ability to taste, cooking became a torment for the protagonist. He could not determine what he had created, so Charlie became his indicator. The next day, Martin's new friends came to visit him. Adam and his wife sat at the table and waited anxiously for their order to be brought. Grace was glad to be able to get out of the house. The girl hadn't been to a cafe for a long time. She couldn't go far and was happy that the new restaurant would be very close. Finally, the cook appeared. He was glad to see his guests. Martin brought the first order. The smell and appearance of the cutlets were very appetizing. The farmer's wife looked at the delicious dish with admiration. Grace took the knife and cut off the first piece. The girl slowly brought the cutlet to her mouth, anticipating its delicious taste. The men watched Grace's reaction with bated breath. The guest was delighted. She had never tasted such delicious cutlets. The meat was juicier and crispier, and the girl found the sauce similar to the previous one. Memories of past years came flooding back to Adam's wife. Martin was pleased that he was able to please the guests. The Lee family sat at a table and reminisced about their first date. Then the couple also went to a restaurant. And since then, the girl has loved pork cutlets. Although, of course, the most precious thing was the memories of the happy time. The young cook was glad that his new friends were happy again. Martin glanced at his chief assistant out of the corner of his eye. A contented little Charlie with a full belly lay nearby. After the first visitors left, the main character became thoughtful. The young man decided that he didn't have to cook only Italian cuisine. The young chef thought that the wishes of future clients should also be taken into account. Martin noticed that his four-legged friend was sad. The protagonist suggested that Charlie missed his forest. The baby seemed to understand his owner and pricked up his ears. The young man thought that it was not easy for the wolf cub to be in the world of people, where he had so unexpectedly ended up. It was necessary to return the animal to its usual home, although Martin became very attached to his furry friend. Thinking about taking Charlie home, the protagonist remembered the horrors of that world and shuddered. The young man even began to shake from the terrible memories. He was not ready to return to the mysterious forest. The baby looked at the man with hope. There was sadness in Charlie's eyes. He really missed his old life. So Martin found himself in another world again, deciding to throw a farewell picnic for his friend. The main character constantly felt someone's gaze on him and already repented of his actions. Charlie confidently led his master forward. Suddenly, the young man felt the freshness and smell of the pond. Having passed through the bushes, the young man froze in amazement. In front of Martin was a huge lake with clear blue water, and mountain ranges were visible in the distance. The main character caught himself thinking that he had never seen such beauty before. The fluffy baby was happy. He ran to the shore. The water and his eyes were almost the same color. Martin decided to arrange a picnic spot near the lake, and as a farewell, he prepared a little surprise for his pet. The cook took out his equipment and began to prepare the dish. The young man had prepared pieces of very expensive meat in advance. After adding spices and oil, the young man lit a fire. The schnitzel turned out very aromatic and looked appetizing. Charlie ate with great pleasure, his tail never stopping spinning for a minute. Martin took out a can of beer and looked at the beautiful landscape with satisfaction. One thing was upsetting: the taste still hasn't returned. The main character decided not to be upset and to rest. The view was truly stunning. The young man relaxed and enjoyed the mysterious silence. However, the calm did not last long. The young cook felt a sharp object at his throat. Martin saw the sword and was very scared. A rough male voice behind him asked the young man who he was and what he was doing here. The giant looked very menacing. The weapon was really real. The young man could not move from fear. He could hardly answer that he was a simple cook. The guard could not believe the stranger's words. He had never met strangers at the border. The squire demanded that the young man tell the truth. Suddenly, the man heard sounds and looked around. A small white wolf cub was eating the last pieces of meat from the plate with gusto. Martin was willing to pay money to be released. The menacing stranger sheathed his sword and apologized. The man introduced himself as Francis, the captain of the knights of a small human town, currently patrolling the borders of his territory. The main character also gave his name, not understanding why the warrior's attitude towards him had changed so abruptly. A well-fed Charlie slept peacefully on the grass, not paying attention to anyone. The guard explained that if a white wolf accompanies a person, it is a good sign. Francis said that this species of predators inherited the blood of an ancient god. The wolf god had the ability to see good and evil and was very wise. The pack of white wolves inherited some of the abilities of their ancient predecessor. One of the representatives of the predators was now very close to the interlocutors and was sleeping peacefully. Martin was amazed by the discovery. Now he understood many things. The protagonist remembered how the deity's descendant quickly destroyed food and cleverly avoided strangers. Francis learned that the stranger was simply preparing food and enjoying the local scenery. In a beautiful place, food really does taste different. The knight's attention was drawn to a plate with delicious pieces of meat. Martin invited the uninvited guest to try the food. It was impossible to resist the smell that emanated from the dish. Francis carefully took the piece and put it in his mouth. The guard was dumbfounded. He could not understand how the meat could be so juicy and tender. The knight's gaze stopped on the strange jar in the young man's hands. The main character said that he took beer with him. The man could not refuse to try the unfamiliar potion. He was interested in what they drink in another country. Francis downed the liquid from the special can in one gulp, not believing that beer could be rich and tart. The knight was completely delighted. The drink seemed very tasty to him. The formidable guard looked at the unfamiliar object with surprise. After such a magnificent treat, the man said goodbye. He had to continue patrolling. But before leaving, he invited the young man to visit his town whenever he wanted. The captain of the knights said that he was glad to make a new acquaintance. Martin looked at the guard in surprise. He did not understand his status in this world. Finally, Francis warned the young man to be careful, as there were many dangers in these places, although the white wolf was his reliable guide, with whom there was no one to fear. Charlie woke up and demanded food again. The guard left, and only now did Martin realize that the knight had consumed alcohol on duty. Francis clutched the treasured jar tightly, hoping that he would meet his new acquaintance again. The main character gave the last portion to his shaggy friend, preparing to part. Martin recalled the moments of the meeting and the happy moments when the furry animal was nearby. It was time for the young man to return home, and he sadly packed his equipment. While Charlie was eating enthusiastically, the young man sighed and set off on his way back, not knowing if he would ever see the wolf cub again. The protagonist glanced out of the corner of his eye to see his friend licking the bowl, not paying any attention to him. Martin was sad to part with Charlie. The young man understood that the forest was the wolf's home and mentally wished him luck. Looking back once more in farewell, the young cook did not see his furry friend. Martin was very upset. He wanted to look at the little descendant of the gods again. Hearing strange sounds behind him, the young man looked back. Charlie jumped on his friend's back and grabbed hold of his backpack tightly. The wolf cub growled and had no intention of hiding his claws. The main character was tired and couldn't tear the animal away from his travel bag. The baby didn't want to leave. He tenderly licked the hand of his new friend. Martin couldn't understand, because the wolf cub wanted to go home, why he wouldn't let him go now. Charlie looked into the eyes as if saying that he was ready to go with the young man. The wolf cub did not give him a choice. Now he himself decided that he would live with the young man, who was happy about this. He had managed to become attached to his shaggy friend. It was time for the travelers to return to the village. The main character thought that now he would have to visit another world more often. Not far from his house, the main character saw a large number of people who were celebrating something. Several people were sitting on rugs. There was a lot of food everywhere. Others were singing and dancing to the music. Martin couldn't understand what all these strangers were doing near his house. The headman went to meet the young man. He was glad that the owner of the establishment had returned. Henry explained to the surprised boy that it was a village festive dinner. The main character didn't know about the event. No one warned him about it. The order was delivered right on time. It was a big sign with a greeting. The elder asked the upset boy to join the celebration. Only now did Martin realize that everything had been organized for him. The locals were happy that the young man had come to their village. The cook couldn't believe his eyes. There were strangers sitting at several tables, all of them happy to meet each other and wanting the restaurant to open sooner. Many have already heard about the young chef's magical cutlets. Adam and his wife watched with excitement as their friend was torn to pieces. The main character was very tired and wanted to go and rest. Grace said that in their small town everyone knows each other, shares joys, and helps everyone. Henry confirmed the girl's words. He also believed that their strength lay in the friendship of people. The headman advised the young man to advertise the new restaurant. Martin couldn't believe that everyone there wished him well. People were chatting animatedly at the tables, and Grace brought some snacks. The elders interacted with the youth, sharing their memories. The main character watched what was happening with surprise. The young man noticed that his shaggy friend had suddenly disappeared. At this time, Charlie took advantage of the moment and actively destroyed the food. The cute, fluffy animal stole pieces of meat from the plates and ran away. Residents tried to catch the hooligan, who didn't even let them pet him. The tasty pieces instantly evaporated in the baby's mouth, and he ate only good quality products and without freezing. Martin watched the antics of his furry friend with shame, not admitting that it was his pet. The main character even had time to regret taking Charlie back home. Suddenly, the young man's gaze fell on a boy sitting alone nearby. The child was the only one at the party and looked very upset. Martin turned his attention to the baby. The grandmother approached her grandson and offered him a sandwich. The boy angrily snatched the food from the old woman's hands and threw it on the ground. The young man didn't like the behavior of the unfamiliar child at all. Henry approached the upset woman. He did not understand what had happened to Bob, why he was behaving so aggressively. It turned out that the boy had come from school, where his friend was enthusiastically talking about his trip to the city, where he walked with his parents and ate hamburgers. Martin listened attentively to the story of his grandmother, who tried to calm her grandson and bought him something similar in the store. Residents suggested looking for hamburgers in neighboring villages. It turned out that such products are sold only in specialized cafes in amusement parks. Henry listened to everyone and suggested that they try to cook the unfamiliar dish themselves. Nobody knew what a hamburger was, so the headman turned to a chef for help. The elder apologized. He had no one else to ask for help with food. Henry told Martin that the child didn't care about taste. He probably just wanted attention. The boy was jealous of his friend who was at the amusement park with his family. Bob's mother had been in the city hospital for several months, and his father was on a long business trip in another country, so he felt lonely. Martin knew this feeling. He sometimes felt sad alone, too. The whole village took care of the boy, helping his grandmother. The young man could not sleep at night. It was not difficult to prepare hamburgers, although he himself had never tried them and did not know the real taste. Insatiable Charlie has already prepared his bowl, ready for new experiments. The main character had no choice but to accept the challenge, especially since he had to pay the residents for the tricks of the furry beast, who left everyone at the festival without tasty meat. The baby's bottomless blue eyes glowed with joy. After a while, the juicy hamburger was ready. Charlie was ready to begin the audition. While his furry assistant was eating, Martin recalled his years of study. The main character came to the States with the goal of entering one of the most famous culinary educational institutions. The young man loved to cook since childhood and often developed various seasonings and even dishes on his own. The young man wondered if he could see himself from the recent past. Who doesn't know what he wants? Martin was dissatisfied with himself and moved on to the next portions. The kid was happy to help his friend. His plate was already empty. The main character remembered that taste always came first for him. Time flew by unnoticed. Morning came. The process was almost complete. Just the finishing touches needed to be added. The coveted hamburger was almost ready. Bob was already sitting at the table and waiting for a surprise. The boy was accompanied by his grandmother and the Lee family, and as soon as they entered, they could smell the subtle aromas of roast meat and warm buns. The child looked at the work of culinary art in fascination. Martin thanked him for waiting. The order was ready. The adults were amazed at how beautifully each layer was laid. Bob looked at the hamburger thoughtfully and didn't know which side to take it from. Finally, the boy made up his mind and brought the sandwich to his mouth. The child's eyes shone with surprise. The hamburger seemed 100 times better to him than the store-bought one. Bob thanked his grandmother for bringing him here. The elderly woman was glad that her grandson liked the treat. The boy stopped chewing and remembered his mother again. In fact, the child did not want a tasty dish, but to meet his sick mother. He hoped that if he asked for a hamburger, he would be taken to the city. The grandmother hugged the boy. She understood how hard it was for him alone. The child began to cry bitterly. He really missed his parents a lot. The main character promised Bob that when he went to the city, he would take him with him. The boy couldn't believe that this was possible. Grandma thanked Martin for his concern, and Grace asked the boy to take more photos when he was at the amusement park. The child was happy and began to look forward to the journey to his dream. The young man was pleased that he would be able to help the others. The next day, the young chef decided to conduct an audit of the remaining food products. There was enough food to go on a hike. Martin thought that he had never pitched a tent before, and when the restaurant opened, he would have no free time at all. The main character looked questioningly at his furry assistant. Charlie's tail moved vigorously from side to side, betraying his owner's thoughts. The young man tried to convince his shaggy friend that he was going on a regular hike and not to another world. After some time, the young cook was resting after the crossing and was thinking about how he began to visit the mysterious forest more often than the grocery store. It was time to unpack things and pitch the tent. The protagonist took out his equipment, happy that he had successfully found a beautiful place. It was completely quiet in the clearing in the forest. While Charlie was chasing butterflies, Martin was trying to put up the tent. The task turned out to be difficult. In all his years of life, the main character had never been on a campaign. Finally, the place to spend the night was ready. Setting up the tent turned out to be more difficult for the young man than he expected. Now it was necessary to prepare food. Hunger was already making itself felt. Some of the food had been prepared in advance, so lunch was ready quickly. Martin took out a plate of meat and added his signature sauce. Glad to have the opportunity to rest and eat, the protagonist calmly sat down in a chair. The little furry guests did not allow the young man to enjoy his solitude. The cook decided to share the remains of raw meat with the animals. The young man tossed the tasty morsels, trying to attract the attention of the long-eared guests. At that very second, a huge beak flashed in front of Martin's nose and grabbed the food. The giant bird soared into the sky, quickly leaving the frightened cook behind. Having calmed down a little, the young man shared his food with the little guests. After having a snack, the main character sat in a chair watching the beautiful scenery. Previously, the young man thought that he would be bored in nature, but suddenly he felt how pleasant it was to relax in the forest. Martin continued his dinner, enjoying the silence around him. The young man did not immediately notice that he was being watched from the nearby bushes. Hearing a rustle, the protagonist looked back, hoping that it was Charlie who had returned, having run away into the forest again. The young man called his friend, showing him how much delicious food he had managed to prepare. A shaggy red paw with huge claws appeared from the thicket. The main character managed to react and remove the dish. An unfamiliar little animal jumped out into the clearing. Martin looked at the next guest with curiosity. An unknown creature stood in front of the young man. The half-beast or half-man looked like a wild cat, but it was clear that it was a child, most likely a girl. The werewolf was in an aggressive mood and growled, choosing the moment to attack. The main character saw such a creature for the first time, more like heroes from science fiction films. The tail was very similar to a cat's. Martin watched the uninvited guest with suspicion. The stranger's hands had skin with very short hair and sharp claws on her fingers. The cat chose the moment and attacked the man. The main character had to dodge again to avoid getting injured. The half-beast was upset and was preparing to jump again. The young man did not understand what was happening. His shaggy assistant ran away at the most crucial moment. Martin decided to talk to the guest, offering to do without bloodshed. Seeing the cat's gaze, the young man realized that she was hungry. The protagonist placed the plate of food on the ground, inviting the stranger to take the food and leave. The half-man carefully approached the delicious-smelling dish. The little werewolf looked closely at the food, which was emitting delicious aromas. The pieces of meat really looked very appetizing. The delicious smell from the baby's mouth made her drool. Martin watched as the uninvited guest grabbed the juicy piece with her teeth. The cat didn't have time to swallow the meat. A fiery fire was burning in her mouth. With tears in her eyes, the girl rolled on the grass. Not knowing what to do, Martin remembered that he added hot sauce to the meat. After a while, the baby calmed down and licked her lips. The girl must have been very hungry because she approached the dish again. The cat began to carefully gnaw piece after piece. The protagonist thought that the stranger liked the food, despite its spiciness. The bushes rustled again and the sound of branches cracking was heard. A satisfied Charlie jumped out of the thicket into the clearing. The wolf cub watched in bewilderment as someone took his food. The fluffy lump rushed into battle, defending his plate. Martin tried to separate the fighting kids. The werewolf did not want to give in and growled. The main character did not know who to save. Both animals tried to attack each other. The boy lifted Charlie high, preventing the stranger from hurting him with her sharp claws. Suddenly, another half-beast appeared in the clearing and grabbed the girl by the clothes, preventing her from moving. The adult werewolf apologized to the man for the little girl's actions. A moment later, both beastmen vanished into thin air. Martin stood there in surprise. The next day, the main character returned home. The young man took up cleaning again. It was necessary to prepare for the opening of the restaurant. The main character thought, dreaming about starting work. A beautiful sign was already hanging above the entrance. The young chef summed up the results. The repairs were done, the food was prepared, everything was ready for the beginning of a new period of life. While Martin was thinking about the future, an old woman entered the restaurant. Despite the fact that the establishment was supposed to open the next day, the chef invited the visitor to the table. The elderly woman began to look around the room with curiosity. Grandma noticed that most of the furniture remained the same. With the change of owner, practically nothing has changed in the interior. Martin got into conversation with the guest. She remembered the times when there was a tea house in this place. The chef asked the lady to place an order. The woman agreed to try the dish that the young chef would prepare for her. She had no idea about European cuisine. The old woman did not make a choice, leaving it to the owner of the establishment. The young man went to the kitchen, realizing that his guest had most likely never eaten Italian food. Pasta with tomatoes was the most popular. Martin thought that it was sure to please the customer. After some time, the portion was ready. Martin wished his first customer bon appetit. He wanted to serve her perfectly. The cook was confident in himself. His pasta was always praised. He knew how to cook it very tasty. The woman only touched the food a couple of times. The main character was shocked. He could not understand why the guest did not like his food. There was a knock on the door. Someone was trying to see what was going on inside the restaurant. The headman went inside and really liked the sign. Henry greeted the old lady next door with surprise as she came out of the building. The elderly woman told the astonished old man that she had already eaten and gone outside. Martin stood over his full plate, upset. Henry didn't understand how so much food could be left behind. The main character was upset. He could not understand what his mistake was. The elder tried to calm the young cook, who was sitting in the corner, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. The young man realized that he was not at all ready to open a restaurant. Henry sat the guy down at the table and began asking him about what had happened. The elderly man convinced his friend that the old woman did not come to the restaurant for food. Barbara used to come here often with her husband. He was a regular at the tea house. Unfortunately, he died last year and the woman was left alone. Henry said it wasn't Martin's fault that his client left without trying anything. However, the main character was upset, realizing that he was unable to interest the visitor. To analyze the situation and find a way out, the young man went to the treasured forest again, where he could admire the scenery and think calmly. Recently, no one had bothered him in the mysterious world. Martin felt sorry for the lonely old woman. The young man kept thinking about how to surprise Barbara since she refused his signature pasta. At the top, among the beautiful branches, sat the little cat again. The girl realized that she had been seen and became angry. The protagonist looked at the werewolf, realizing that she was hungry again. The young man demonstratively stood up from his chair and called Charlie to eat. The half-beast climbed down from the tree and carefully crept closer. In a few minutes, the juicy meat was ready. Martin cut the piece into pieces and poured the sauce over it. The camping stove was an excellent substitute for a campfire. The protagonist remembered the previous incident with the hot sauce, so he didn't add pepper. In addition to the meat, the chef prepared mushrooms in a creamy cheese sauce. The delicious dish was finally ready. The young man placed the plate in front of the growling guest. The cat remembered how spicy the food was last time and was no longer in a hurry to grab the pieces. The tailed girl carefully took the meat in her teeth. The baby felt like she was in heaven. It was the most delicious food she had ever tasted in her life. The cat meowed gratefully, happiness shining in her golden eyes. The half-beast began to quickly destroy the prepared food. Within moments, the plate was licked clean. Martin understood without words that the girl liked it. She was ready to eat the same amount again. The young chef thought about the fact that the food that was actually prepared was a bit fatty, and this dish was not suitable for everyone. The main character began to analyze his recipes, realizing that he needed to change a lot in his cooking. The cat noticed that they stopped paying attention to her and meowed invitingly, fawning over her new acquaintance. Martin was happy to talk and stroke the baby. The young man came to an important conclusion for himself that the main thing is the result. That is, the customer needs to like the dish. The girl listened attentively to the stranger. She was full and happy. Returning home, the main character took up the spring greenery. The young man decided to show the plants to his assistant. However, Charlie didn't even sniff it. He wasn't interested in the grass. Martin had to rely on his past experience. And besides, the wolf cub would not always be with him. He had to learn to cook again until his taste returned. The main character got down to business again. Now he understood how he could surprise Barbara. The headman approached the restaurant and read a notice that said the opening of the establishment was postponed. Henry realized that the chef was upset by the first failure and therefore postponed the deadline. The old woman sat alone in the courtyard of the house and enjoyed the sun's rays. The old man knocked and asked permission to enter. Barbara was very surprised to see her neighbor. The elder said that the cook was very upset when the old woman left a full plate of pasta. The grandmother said that she did not like the dish, but she did not understand how she upset the new owner of the restaurant. Henry asked the neighbor to give Martin another chance. Having thanked the woman for her conversation, the village elder went out for a walk again. Barbara was left alone again, pondering the words of her wise neighbor. The protagonist wiped the floor from his forehead for the first time he worked so hard on a new dish. The chef used vegetables and a little seafood to balance the flavors. The combination should be magnificent. Martin was pondering how to invite the old lady again when the sound of the bell was heard. The young man was not expecting guests and looked out of the kitchen in surprise. Barbara stood at the threshold, waiting for permission to enter. The young man happily greeted the woman and sat her down at a laid table. The old woman was surprised that the food was already ready. The woman thought that she would see again the noodles that she didn't like the first time, already regretting that she had come. Suddenly, an unfamiliar, pleasant smell enveloped Barbara. The cook thanked us for waiting and put a plate on the table, saying that it was a special dish. Barbara looked at the fragrant paste with daylily in surprise. It was the first time she had heard of such a plant. The old lady decided to give it a try, and besides, she loved shellfish. The woman swallowed the first portion with pleasure and listened to her feelings. The taste of spring greenery reminded Barbara of her walks with her husband, who loved flowers very much. Grandma looked thoughtfully out the window. It was spring outside again. The elderly lady resumed her meal. Barbara called the cook over and thanked him, noting that this dish had never been on the menu before. Martin admitted that he only prepared food for his first client. The young man wanted to experiment and become better. The old lady finished everything and asked for the bill. The main character was glad that his dish was to his taste. He didn't want to take the money. Barbara insisted that the restaurant owner should be paid for his work and asked to add this product to the menu. When we parted, the old woman promised to drop by for lunch sometimes. Feeling relieved, Martin went on holiday to another world, now feeling he could handle the restaurant. The main character lay on a hammock, remembering Barbara's kind words. The restaurant's first customer was pleased. A well-fed Charlie basked nearby. He was very sad if he was not in his world for several days. A giant bird flew past, covering half the sky with its body. Through his sunglasses, the young man saw a strange, huge cloud approaching. A frustrated Francis appeared from the thicket. The bird flew away, and he was left without lunch. The captain of the knights came out into the clearing and was surprised. His young friend's camp was in disarray, and the young man himself could not recover from his fear. The main character tried to get up after an unexpected visit from an uninvited guest. He was shaking all over. His glasses were broken. Not paying any attention to the mess and the guy's condition after meeting the bird, the man greeted him and approved of Martin's choice. The place to rest was chosen perfectly. The guard said that instead of patrolling today, he was hunting. Hearing the predator's cherished word, Charlie pricked up his ears. Francis was delighted it was his time to feed his friends. But the main character was upset by the invitation to hunt. He didn't like killing animals. The knight did not ask his young friend's wishes and handed him a bow and arrows. While Martin was examining the unfamiliar weapon, the hunters found a pasture of local wild animals. Huge creatures, very similar to ostriches, frolicked in the clearing. The knight was glad. The meat of these strange beasts should be enough for several people. The two-legged birds seemed very cute from afar and resembled cotton candy. But in fact, instead of feathers, they had short fur. They were very strong and aggressive creatures and could run fast. Francis chose the moment to attack and rushed forward, the wolf cub keeping pace with the hunter. The main character was confused. He didn't know what to do. The knight shouted to the youth to support the attack from the rear, and Martin fired. The young man held a bow for the first time. Just a few minutes ago, the guard showed him how to handle the weapon, so the arrow almost hit the fluffy lump. Charlie managed to jump aside at the last moment. The cook was upset. He could easily hurt his friends. Evening had come. The sun had set behind the mountains when the hunters had finished cutting up their prey. Francis roasted local ostrich meat over a fire. The main character's hand was still shaking. In fact, pulling the bowstring turned out to be very difficult. The knight, joyful in anticipation of the meal, handed his guest a piece of meat. Martin didn't know what to do. The smell was simply unbearable. Even Charlie didn't try the treat. It was impolite to cover his nose, so the young man had difficulty bringing the resulting shashlik to his mouth. Even the lack of taste didn't help the protagonist feel how disgusting the piece smelled. Seeing that Francis was about to fry the next portion, the main character became indignant. The young man decided to try cooking meat himself. The only thing that bothered the main character was that he had never encountered local animals and did not know their characteristics. But he took the risk of trusting his experience. Martin wondered how he could quickly get rid of the smell of game and blood. There was only dark beer available, so the cook poured it into the pot. The knight watched with a distraught expression as the wonderful alcoholic drink was being used for something other than its intended purpose. The young man sent his older friend to make a device for the kettle. There were few spices, and there was not enough bay leaf. Sensing the aromatic scents, a shaggy assistant appeared from the bushes. The chef mixed all the ingredients and left the meat to soak for an hour. Time flew by quickly. After the prey was extinguished on the fire, the wonderful smell spread throughout the area. Francis was ready to swallow the delicacy whole. However, it was still necessary to fry the delicious pieces over the fire. The meat was then cut into small pieces. The knight captain held the deliciously smelling dish in his hands and could not believe that this was the same game that he had caught today. None of the local chefs had managed to cook this beast so deliciously. Francis put the first portion in his mouth and froze in delight. The crust crunched between the teeth. The meat was tender and juicy. The guard couldn't believe it. For the first time in his life, he was enjoying food. The beer was a perfect match for the perfect dinner under the stars. The man was delighted, enjoying the food. Francis was ready to eat such delicious food every day. The main character was upset that he was unable to completely get rid of the smell. Usually, this process took longer. The furry assistant actively wagged his tail, indicating that the experiment was a success. Charlie held out his empty plate in hopes of getting an extra helping, and Martin thought about taking more spices with him on his next trip for different occasions. Francis did not understand why his young friend was upset, because he cooked better than all the masters he knew. The captain of the knights thanked the young man for the magnificent dinner. The main character was glad that his dish was liked. The man dreamed of trying to cook meat at home on his own, using new techniques, while the well-fed wolf cub slept peacefully next to him. The guard tried to convince the boy that no one in his town could cook better than him. The protagonist listened to the praise with satisfaction, remembering the recent past. The young chef often heard the most flattering reviews about his culinary abilities from those around him and from professionals. Francis decided to thank his young friend and teach him how to wield a sword. Martin was shocked by the offer. He did not understand at all why he needed a weapon. The knight captain said that he is one of the best teachers and constantly works with young warriors. The protagonist's attempts to give up training were unsuccessful. The guard warned the young man that he would begin his studies the next time they met. The men drank to the decision they had made, and the cook had only to agree. He was given the task of taking beer and a tasty snack with him again. The other world was amazingly beautiful. Even the night sky glowed, reminiscent of the northern lights. The vacation was over. It was time to return to everyday concerns. The first week has passed since the restaurant opened. In the first days, there were many visitors, but then the flow subsided, and no one dropped in to visit the owner of the establishment. The main character didn't know what to do with himself out of boredom. Charlie spent all day watching TV. At that moment, a program about music was on. The live broadcast featured an interview with girls from a modern group called Dream, who performed youth songs and recently released a new album. The young man thought his friend was the main manager of this team. An old friend was very close at this time. Dennis and the girls were filming outdoors. The singers had some free time left. They were relaxing after a hard day at work. The young man decided to take advantage of the opportunity and visit his friend. Dennis dialed the familiar number and heard Martin's voice. The girls were bored and listened with curiosity to their leader's conversation. The manager made arrangements to visit a friend soon to chat and have dinner. Hearing the words about the chef and food, the beauties decided to follow Dennis. The girls' eyes were shining with curiosity. They really wanted to meet the mysterious chef. The young man gave instructions to his assistant to look after the musicians during his absence and take them home. The young man promised the boss that everything would be fine. Dennis knew the beauties' personalities, so he doubted that they wouldn't get into some kind of trouble. However, the girls behaved very obediently and said goodbye to the mentor. After the boss left, lead singer Alice insisted that their handler follow him. The inexperienced assistant manager tried to resist. He was determined to carry out the instructions of his senior colleague. The main character was not expecting guests and immediately started cleaning. Charlie listened attentively to his friend, who said that he was going to cook again. There was a detective series on TV, and during surveillance on the highway, a group of pursuers was discovered. While Martin was pondering the menu, there was a knock at the door and a visitor entered. Dennis was not alone and was very indignant. He had long noticed the assistant's car, which was constantly following him along the empty road. The restaurant owner listened attentively to his friend, not understanding what was happening. At this time, a group of musicians flew into the restaurant with delight, sharing their impressions of what they saw. They liked the coziness inside and the chef himself. The main character was a little upset. He specifically went to the wilderness to avoid meeting noisy companies. The girls looked at the fluffy puppy with curiosity, trying to pet it. The owner allocated a table for the unexpected guests. Dennis was very unhappy with the behavior of his charges, convincing them to leave the establishment, but suddenly the chef's voice was heard. The main character suggested to his friend to feed the guests first. The manager was surprised by the offer. He had known for a long time that his old friend did not like surprises at all. Dennis thought not long ago Martin would have made a big scene if something hadn't gone according to plan. The young chef approached the girls to find out their preferences. When Dennis took the boy to this remote village, he thought that he had simply gone crazy from popularity and the peculiarities of celebrity life. The young man noticed that his friend had changed, and it was even surprising that he had a shaggy pet. The cook left the guests and went to work his magic in the kitchen. The main character wanted to cook something unusual and tasty. The chef wondered what ingredients he had. The professional refrigerator almost always contained some supplies. Having carried out the inspection, the young man was delighted. Now he knew how he would surprise his friend and his companions. After a few seconds, the work began to boil. The knife began to work as usual, slicing small tomatoes. The stove with frying pans was already waiting for its turn. Martin knew that it was always important for beauties that their meals were light and nutritious. Very soon, the delicious salad and steaks were ready. The members of the musical group saw such beauty for the first time. The pasta with signature sauce was a wonderful addition. The girls couldn't resist and pounced on the aromatic dinner with gusto. Alice was delighted with the pasta. She had never tasted such delicious pasta before. Another musician enjoyed a juicy piece of meat. Dennis watched his friend's behavior carefully. The girls were ready to cry from disappointment. They had never eaten so deliciously before. The manager was still angry about the group members' actions, and his friend suggested that he also have dinner with everyone. Even Dennis's assistant calmed down and ate his pasta with great pleasure, no longer regretting that he had not followed the boss's instructions. The main character prepared a special dish for his faithful companion so that he would have enough energy to get to the big city. The young man was frightened, thinking that his friend was behaving unusually because he was terminally ill, but his assumption turned out to be wrong. After an unusually delicious dinner, the guests said goodbye to the restaurant owner. Martin invited everyone to come again and promised to prepare dishes that would be even better next time. Alice thanked the cook on behalf of everyone. She had managed to find his information on the internet. The protagonist was surprised that his name was still known. The assistant manager put the beauties in the car. It was time to go home. They promised to definitely come to visit. Dennis shared a secret. The girls often watched the chef's videos with cooking secrets. It was time for the young man to go to the city too. The road was long. The main character was glad of the unexpected meeting, but asked to inform about the visit in advance next time. Before leaving, Dennis inquired about his friend's health. Martin looked rested and even happy. The guests left. Little Charlie settled peacefully back into his chair in front of the TV and fell asleep after a restless evening. The next morning, the protagonist went to the supermarket to replenish his food supplies. The nearest store was at the other end of the village. The rest were in small neighboring towns. Martin needed some spring greens, and last time he bought them here. The young man entered the spacious hall and said hello. There were practically no customers. The main character noticed the young saleswoman. He saw her here for the first time. The girl modestly responded to the stranger and offered help. The young chef refused. He knew what he wanted. Unfortunately, the daylily that old Barbara loved was not there. The upset young man said goodbye and left the store. He really didn't want to go to the city to buy the necessary greens. The young man heard children's voices and looked in the direction from which the noise was coming. The boy and the girl grabbed each other by the hair and didn't want to let go. The little girl screamed that she would not play with the liar anymore. The guy also refused to be friends with a foreigner, sending his rival, who was not like the locals, to the country from which she came with her mother. The couple stood opposite each other, neither of them wanting to give in. The main character approached the fighters and unclasped their hands. Martin scolded the boy for the words he had unfairly spoken about the girl. Hearing screams in the street, a saleswoman came out of the supermarket. The girl saw her daughter among a group of children. The little girl ran to her mother with tears in her eyes. The store worker hugged the child and asked her what had happened. The young man let the boy go, and now his enemy had his own protector. The little offender ran away, afraid that he would be punished. The stranger's name was Jang. She thanked the main character for helping the girl. Martin told the girl that he had not done anything special. The young man inquired about the condition of the girl, who was very upset. Little Kara had already calmed down and fallen asleep. The supermarket saleswoman told her interlocutor that the conflict occurred because of her. The cook tried to convince the girl that this was a normal children's quarrel. The foreigner said that she recently moved with her child to a small village from distant Vietnam and has not yet gotten used to the local customs. Jang felt like her daughter was constantly being laughed at. At school, children often made fun of Kara. The main character did not know how to calm his interlocutor. Her words were true. Martin remembered the boy angrily shouting at the little girl that she was not like the others and sending her back to where she came from. The young man understood that the child could have said such words simply out of anger in order to unfairly offend another. Jang calmed down a little. She remembered that she had heard about a young man who had a restaurant on the other side of the village and was glad to meet him. The Vietnamese woman asked to teach her how to cook local dishes. The main character was very surprised by the request. The saleswoman said that Kara had a birthday soon and she wanted to invite her friends to the party, so the girl needed to prepare some treats for everyone. Martin promised to help and said goodbye. In the evening, he thought about what he could offer his new acquaintance. The young man could not refuse, but he did not like the idea of a beauty. The young man did not know what dishes would interest the little guests. The main character understood that the girl was wrong. She just wanted to please her daughter and her friends. The cook was distracted from his thoughts by a fluffy Charlie. The kid came for help. He brought some canned food so that his older friend could open it. The young chef thought about how his pet always ran to him when he was hungry. The baby's behavior gave the protagonist the idea that he needed to ask for help if necessary. The young man thought about his neighbors who could suggest the right solution. Taking a small gift, the restaurant owner went to the Lee couple. The cook decided that the family knew all the local peculiarities and customs. Grace was very surprised by the unexpected guest. Old man Henry also went to see his neighbors to chat and drink some water. The village elder was outraged that the cook did not turn to him for advice. He should be aware of all the events. The young man told his friends about the children's fight and the Vietnamese woman's request to prepare national dishes. Grace remembered Kara. The girl often walked with Bob after classes. The young man listened attentively to the farmer's wife. Adam said that there is only one school in the village, so all children of different ages study in a combined class. Martin learned that there were 20 students in total. Of course they knew each other well. The young man understood that every parent is ready to do everything to make their child happy. Henry intervened in the conversation. He was categorically against the idea of local dishes. The headman asked the young man to convince Jang to make some foreign dishes. The old man was sure that the children would not be able to appreciate Kara's mother's actions due to their age, so there was no need to try in vain. The elderly man suggested showing the young guests that there are different nations and that differences in food should not be a problem for communication. The main character thought about it. He was amazed by Henry's wisdom. The next day, the young man went to visit his new acquaintance. Jang listened to the advice. She doubted that cooking Vietnamese food would be a good idea. The cuisines were very different from each other. The girl was worried that the little guests would not like the food. Martin offered to discuss a menu that would be interesting for children and help with the cooking. The new acquaintance was surprised. She also needed support. There was little time left before the holiday and the friends got to work. The chef suggested choosing dumplings, nems, and rice noodles. After a few hours, the experiment was over. The dishes looked original and very appetizing. The chef agreed to try the food. The young man especially liked the buncha, so he suggested including it in the holiday menu. The young man tried this dish for the first time, and thanks to the special sauce, the food seemed especially tasty. Martin advised the girl to leave the choice of the main diet to this product. While Jang went to get some water, Charlie came to his friend's aid. The young cook watched the shaggy pet's reaction with curiosity. The tail movements indicated that the prepared dish was excellent. The main character advised the girl not to add pepper and reduce the amount of other spices, since this is food for children. Jang also agreed that a little beef could be added to the pork to make the patties more tender. The young man was sure that the little guests would really like this dish. The Vietnamese woman thanked the young man for his help. The main character went home with relief. He was glad that he managed to convince the girl to use her national cuisine. Before Martin had taken a few steps, he heard a child's voice. Kara hurried to catch up with the guest. She also wanted to thank him. The little girl was glad that the young man agreed to help her mother. In her hands, the girl held an invitation to her birthday, which she had drawn herself. The main character praised the child for the beautiful design. Kara didn't believe that anyone would come to visit her, even though she handed out cards to the entire class because she had a fight with a bully who was friends with all the kids in the school. The restaurant owner saw the girl's sad look and tried to calm the little girl down. The young man knew who could help him organize the children. The day of the party arrived, and in anticipation of the guests, Yang and her daughter decorated the house festively. The little girl thought that only 2 people would come to visit her, the cook and her friend Bob. Kara was very nervous. It was her first birthday in another country. The girl stood thoughtfully at the door, waiting for the invited children. Zhang decided to distract her daughter from her disturbing thoughts and called out to her. The girl saw for the first time a beautiful, unusual outfit that her mother wore to a party. After learning that this was a traditional Vietnamese garment, Kara wanted one too. The girl's joy knew no bounds when her mother gave her a festive outfit. There was a knock at the door, and the little girl tensed up again. Zhang suggested that her daughter meet the guests together. The girl went to open the door, happy that someone had come. Opening the door, the little girl was confused when she saw the first visitor. Kara didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready for the meeting. The girl's recent offender stood at the entrance with a guilty look. The beauty asked Kevin why he came. She did not invite him to her party. The boy asked for forgiveness. He repented of having offended his classmate. Kevin couldn't take it anymore and started crying. He really wanted to be friends with the new student. Kara was confused. She was surprised by the guy's words. The main condition of the party was the presence of an invitation, so the girl forgave her friend and brought him the treasured postcard. The boy couldn't believe it. Tears were rolling down his eyes. Kevin promised to never hurt the girl again. Kara ceremoniously presented her classmate with an invitation to his birthday party. The boy looked at the beautifully designed pass to the banquet. The guy was happy and thanked his girlfriend. It turned out that all the other guests were standing behind the gate and impatiently waiting for their classmates to make peace. The rest of the school children supported Kara and advised their friend not to bully the girl from another country anymore. The whole class was happily waving invitations. It was time to start the party. The little girl was happy with the guests and gifts. The table was set. The aroma filled the whole house. The children looked at the unfamiliar dishes with delight and surprise. The main character was already there and helping Zhang. He was also happy that all his classmates had gathered together. The hostess happily told us the names of different products and how to eat them. The little guests tasted the food unknown to them with gusto. The Vietnamese dumplings looked unusual, and the children also liked them. After having a snack, the classmates began to share news. Bob was very interested in the birthday girl's beautiful dress. Kara said that this outfit is from her home country. Zhang supported her daughter, confirming that all the food is also from Vietnam. The girl asked her mother to tell everyone about the customs of their country. The main character convinced Zhang to come out to the guests. Almost all the food was already ready. He himself could handle the small work in the kitchen. The happy birthday girl pulled her mother towards her friends to get to know them better. Martin watched his new acquaintances carefully. He was pleased that everything worked out for them. The girl and her daughter showed off their national clothes to the guests. The children really liked the beauty's dresses. In another world, it was morning in the village of beastmen. The tribal leader could not find her disobedient daughter again. Guard Liam reported to Samantha that the child was still able to escape despite the increased number of guards. The leader was sure that little Luna had gone again to see the strange man who had been appearing frequently in the local forests lately. The chief was curious about who could interest the sacred wolf and her disobedient daughter, so she asked her assistant to invite the stranger to visit. Liam was shocked by the tribe leader's decision. Samantha knew that there were no laws prohibiting people from visiting the village. The main cat hoped that none of her subordinates would attack the person or harm him. Unsuspectingly, Martin went back to the fairy tale world for rehabilitation. The shaggy assistant's menacing growl surprised the young man greatly. Charlie looked with fear at the unknown products that the cook took with him this time. The main character was surprised by the wolf cub's reaction when he saw arthropod crustaceans for the first time. The furry friend usually easily dealt with large predators and scary monsters from the local forest. Today the chef decided to treat the baby to seafood. The young cook began to prepare the food. First he had to peel the shrimp. The main character prepared a frying pan and poured salt into it. A few moments later, the crustaceans were neatly laid out and it was time to start cooking. Martin put the dishes on the fire and sat down to rest. Only now did the young man notice that little Luna was already nearby and patiently waiting for a treat. The young man was surprised. He didn't hear the cat come to the camp, but he promised to let him try the new product. After a few minutes, the shrimps were ready. They acquired a nice color and looked very appetizing. The chef cleaned the seafood and placed it on plates for his tailed friends, who curiously examined the unfamiliar food. Having risked taking a bite, each of the shaggy animals felt like a conqueror of the ocean, carried on the waves of an extraordinary taste. The main character watched the reaction of the furry babies with curiosity. Luna and Charlie ate the new delicacy with pleasure. The cook was pleased that his dish was liked. The tailed girl eagerly awaited more. As always, Liam appeared suddenly and silently. The cat was scared. She didn't want to go back home with her bodyguard. The little girl hid behind the legs of her new friend, listening to the indignant words of her mother's assistant. The giant looked at the stranger whom little Luna had trusted. The main character tried to protect the baby. She was hungry. Martin told the unexpected guest that he does not feed the girl unhealthy foods. However, today Liam arrived for the young man. The young man was frightened, not understanding why the strange beastmen needed him. The bodyguard told the boy that he had been invited to the village by the chieftain. Liam added that the head of the tribe is also the mother of the disobedient kitten. The cook was surprised that Luna was the daughter of an important person. The young chef was afraid that they would start asking him about what he had treated the child to, so he decided to refuse the meeting, citing his extreme busyness. Samantha's assistant handed the stranger a tribal warrior horn. Liam warned that once the young man decided to accept the invitation, he could use this item to call the beastmen. The half-human was very polite and behaved correctly. Martin could not understand why he should meet the chief, but he promised to think about it and report his decision. The cook had absolutely no desire to meet Luna's angry relatives. The main character could not at all imagine what a half-beast village looked like. Liam said goodbye and was about to leave when the cook called out to him. The young man could not let the guest go without a treat. The chief's assistant looked into the package that the man handed him. Strange creatures lay inside, emitting a delicious aroma. Arriving home, Liam took a chance to taste the gift. Luna's bodyguard was pleasantly surprised and really enjoyed the treat. Left alone with the furry babies, Martin sighed with relief. While the shaggy friends fought for more, the main character wondered whether he should accept the strange invitation. The cook thought that if Charlie was acting calmly, then there was no threat. Despite his curiosity, he had no desire to visit the village. As if he had smelled delicious food, Francis appeared. The young man was delighted. He just needed the guard's advice. The night captain was surprised to learn that his young friend was expected in the tribe. The man said that for a long time there was no connection between people and half-animals. Not a single person was in their village. It was even surprising that these creatures calmly left the baby with the guy. They had adopted social principles of education. Francis looked at the cook, not understanding what was special about him. The captain of the knights convinced the young man that no one could harm him in a foreign world, so he could safely go visit. Martin calmed down and decided to take advantage of the invitation in a few days. It was time to treat the guard with an unknown product. The young man had specially saved an extra portion of shrimp for him. As the seafood was being cooked, the smell spread throughout the forest. Francis watched with curiosity as the crustaceans changed color in the pan, the shaggy little creatures again waiting for more. The dish looked gorgeous. The slice of lemon completed the look. The young man showed the guest how to extract the tender meat of the krill from its hard shell. The captain of the knights looked at the miracle in amazement, not understanding where his young friend was bringing unknown products from. The man carefully placed the first piece into his mouth. Then something incredible happened. Francis seemed to be rocking on the waves, tasting the gifts of the sea. The guard had never tried anything like this. At this time, the main character was separating the tailed babies who were fighting again over tasty food. The knight commander got tired of cleaning the shrimp and swallowed it whole. The shaggy friends also got tired of waiting and ate the seafood along with the shell. Martin watched his comrades with surprise. The well-fed babies with full bellies could not move and lay down to sleep. In gratitude for the tasty treat, Francis was going to give himself completely to the upcoming training. The young man had already forgotten that he had been promised to be taught how to wield a sword. The knight promised to start with simple exercises. By the evening, after a 4-hour run, the main character's entire body was shaking. Every muscle ached. The guard did not expect that his student would be weak and would not be able to withstand small physical exertion. Charlie felt sorry for his friend and licked the calluses on his feet and the abrasions on his body. Martin felt the pain subside at the touch of the little tongue. It turned out that the saliva of the sacred animal was healing. Luna looked at the wolf cub and also tried to help her new acquaintance. The young man thanked the girl, but she had no healing properties. Admiring the cook's determination, Francis took out the gift. The teacher made a special surprise for the young man. The main character barely got to his feet and looked at the sword with fear. However, the weapon turned out to be much lighter than usual and was made of durable wood. Several years ago, the guard himself made a blade for his daughter, but she refused to train. Now the man is going to teach everything he knows to his young friend. It was only late in the evening that Martin was able to get home. The The young cook quickly prepared dinner, dreaming of going to bed as soon as possible. For the first time in several months, the young man wanted to eat at night. The shaggy assistant also got his share. The main character was glad that he added a little bacon and garlic to the pasta. The taste turned out to be much richer. The kid quickly devoured the food and waited for more, watching his older friend freeze in shock. Only now the cook realized that he had felt a faint taste of the prepared food. He began to try everything in a row, making sure that his abilities began to gradually recover. The main character couldn't believe his luck. The four-legged assistant watched the cook closely. The young man thought that if he had not gone to a distant village, he would have given up his favorite activity long ago. Martin dreamed of being able to cook the way he wanted again. At night, the headman was returning home from his friend. The friends had been drinking, so now Henry was walking and humming a song cheerfully. The elderly man was surprised to notice a light in the restaurant windows late at night. The main character forgot about the pain in his body. He decided to arrange a holiday for himself and Charlie. The contented baby was eagerly awaiting the treat. There was something unusual in the oven, spreading smells throughout the house. For the first time since escaping civilization, Martin decided to cook his signature dish. The young man could not yet fully taste all the subtleties of food, but he was glad even for this. The bar had a supply of wine to celebrate his first successes. Charlie barked to attract the cook's attention. The kid tried to say that the dish turned out great. The main character was glad that he came to the village. Morning came. The owner of the restaurant decided to take a day off. A loud knock on the door interrupted Martin's sleep. The sleepy young man, not understanding anything, looked at the uninvited guest. The headman tried to wake up his neighbor with loud shouts. Henry wanted the boy to follow him. The wolf cub that came out of the bedroom didn't understand anything either. Charlie managed to notice that the old man was dragging his friend into the car. A few seconds later, the car sped off in an unknown direction. The wolf cub stood near the open door in bewilderment. Arriving at the hospital, the elder parked the car and ran to the emergency room, Martin barely keeping up with him. The corridor was already crowded with numerous villagers. Henry told the boy that Grace had been taken to the maternity hospital that night. Adam was the most nervous of all. He was very worried about his wife. Barbara looked at her excited neighbors and decided to tidy up the emergency room. The old woman kicked everyone out into the street so that people wouldn't distract the doctors from their work with their screams. The old woman looked at the boy and asked him to stay with the farmer to support the future father of the Lee family. The young man felt unwell after the night's feast and tried to refuse. The main character sat quietly next to his friend. The young man was in such a situation for the first time and did not know what to say. Martin carefully placed his hand on his comrade's shoulder. Adam was very worried. He was worried about the health of his wife and unborn child. The cook calmly assured the man that everything would be fine, Grace would cope and would soon give birth. A few minutes later, the happy father ran out into the yard. He had a baby girl. The villagers were very happy and gathered to celebrate the momentous event. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the main character asked Henry for advice on what would be best to take with him if he had an invitation to visit friends. At first, the headman was afraid that the neighboring villages wanted to take the young man away from them. Then he calmed down and thought about it. Martin was not surprised to hear that drinks were always the main gift. The elderly man also suggested that they take some snacks with them. The protagonist thanked the elder for the advice. A couple of days later, having collected the bare necessities, the young man again set off to another world. It was scary to blow the horn. A strange sound awakened the forest thicket. The signal was heard not only from above, but also underground. The animals became alarmed when they heard the unusual melody. It turned out that blowing the horn is quite difficult. However, after a few seconds, Liam and Luna were already next to the guest. The assistant to the chieftain of the beastmen was glad that Martin found the time to respond to the invitation. He did not hesitate and hoisted the boy onto his powerful shoulder. The main character was not prepared for the journey upside down. A moment later, Liam made a huge leap and shot upward. The main character felt sick from the surprise and the height, and the bodyguard was surprised that people had become so defenseless that they could not endure the simplest jump over a distance. The young man remembered the words of Francis, who also spoke about the boy's poor preparation. Martin was delighted when his companion suggested that they continue on foot. A few minutes later, Liam reported that they had arrived at the location. The main character was surprised. It was the first time he had been in such an unusual place. The small village looked cozy. The houses resembled yurts. The chieftain's assistant was amazed that such structures also existed in their guest's world. Liam invited his guest to continue on his way. Martin suddenly remembered Francis's words, who said that it was safe to visit the half-beast village. They revered the sacred white wolves, one of which was now nearby. During their last meeting, the captain of the knights told his young friend about the ancient treaty. Many centuries ago, a war raged between different races in this world. The tribes fought each other for hundreds of years. Mountains of corpses lay everywhere. Suffering and death were everywhere. If the war had continued, the end of the world would have come. But higher powers intervened in the affairs of mortals. A treaty was concluded between the races to prevent further conflicts. Gradually, the peoples and tribes separated from each other and stopped communicating altogether. As he got closer to the village, the protagonist began to worry whether the beastmen would accept him. The young man walked between the houses, surrounded on all sides by appraising glances. A small group blocked the guest's path. The old werewolf looked in surprise at the man their leader had invited. Martin felt a wave of hostility coming from the stranger. However, Liam reminded Harley, who turned out to be the local warlord, that the young man was a guest of the tribe. The old man was unhappy. He did not like the presence of a man in the village. The half-human's gazes met, Liam's voice firm as he offered to give way, as he was following the chieftain's instructions. Suddenly, the white wolf cub growled. He didn't like the behavior of the local commander. The villagers were shocked to see the sacred beast in a rage. Martin didn't understand what had happened and tried to calm his shaggy friend. Unexpectedly, Luna stood up to defend the guest and also bared her fangs at Harley. The protagonist said that he came only because he was invited and did not have any devious thoughts. No one immediately noticed the movement from above. Samantha did not wait for the man and hurried to meet him. The leader of the half-beast tribe greeted the stranger. Liam advised Martin to show respect for the high rank. The leader of the half-human race was very charming. The main character bowed, thanking for the invitation. Luna was glad to see her mother. The baby got bored and immediately climbed into my arms. Samantha said that first of all she wants to apologize for her child, who caused additional trouble for the person. The voivode was surprised. He could not understand why his leader was asking for forgiveness from a stranger. The chieftain pretended to have just recognized her subordinate, who was trying to break the ancient treaty and attack the man. Samantha said with a smile that she was confident in the warlord. He was a smart member of the tribe and could not harm people. The old warrior was afraid to go into conflict. He confirmed the words of the village head that he did not intend to harm the guest. The leader of the half-beasts invited the main character to the local palace. She was embarrassed that the residents did not greet him very hospitably. Martin constantly felt numerous glances on himself. It seemed to him that they were ready to tear him into pieces. Samantha said that she really wanted to meet the man who was able to tame the sacred wolf and her daughter. The young cook refused to express gratitude for caring for Luna. He simply treated her to his dishes. The young man remembered that he had prepared for the meeting and brought gifts. The protagonist reached into his backpack and pulled out a small container of food, the smell of which had already spread throughout the entire tent and attracted attention. The chief saw the delicious pieces of pork and was surprised by the guest's modesty. In addition to meat, the head of the tribe received an alcoholic drink that definitely could not exist in another world. Having heard that the container could explode due to the shaking on the way, the guards were ready to pounce on the man. The neck of the bottle flew off, and a stream of sparkling wine flew upward like a salute. Only now did the guards understand what the guest was talking about. He turned out to be safe for their leader. Samantha didn't wait for the whole drink to fly out and decided to taste it. The owner of the settlement was surprised. The wine turned out to be delicious. The girl wanted to try the treat that Martin had prepared. The chief carefully took out a piece of fried pork with spices. The fluffy beauty enjoyed it. There was no game smell at all. The meat was tender and juicy. The bodyguards released the man and were forced to apologize to him. He really did not wish anyone harm. Liam was pleased that his fellow tribesmen recognized the guest. He was already ready to stand up for him. Charlie also growled, warning of his hostile intentions. After a tasty snack, Samantha suggested throwing a feast for the entire village, with the one who caught the tastiest game becoming the chieftain of all the hunters. The main character's eardrums were ready to burst from the enthusiastic screams and loud growls. The tribesmen loudly expressed their joy at the chief's idea. While the villagers went hunting, their leader looked after the children and told the guest about local customs. The tailed babies ran tirelessly across the lawn. Samantha loved to stalk prey herself, but today she was forced to deal with the little cubs. The tribe had a public education for the younger generation, so there was always an adult with them. One animal became interested in the delicious smell and grabbed the main character's trouser leg, trying to test the strength of the fabric with its teeth. Martin tried desperately to save his clothes. The tailed baby clung tightly to the material. It was impossible to tear him away from the man. Finally, the young man managed to free himself from the sharp fangs of the curious child. There was a crash, and the body of a terrible monster from the wild forest fell in front of the cook. The satisfied commander was the first to bring his spoils. Samantha told the guest that this monster is difficult to catch because of its enormous speed of movement, despite its large mass. Harley lived up to his title. He was considered an experienced hunter for good reason. The main character pretended to highly appreciate the merits of the commander in the first game. However, Samantha did not support Martin. She was unhappy with the fact that the leader of the warriors constantly brought back ugly and disgusting animals from the hunt. The next prey that was brought to the main tent was an even more powerful and terrible monster. A proud Charlie, looking like a hero, dragged by the tail a mythical snake-like beast whose venom had paralytic properties. The commander was dissatisfied. The members of his squad alone would not be able to defeat the monster. Harley barely contained his emotions so as not to growl and tear his competitor apart. Even little Luna returned from hunting, purring happily with pleasure. The little cat's gaze fell upon the dead animals, which she had never seen before, and she modestly placed her prey in the common pile. The villagers returned from the forest. It was time to sum up the results, and Samantha announced the name of the winner. The warrior who earned the title of leader of the hunters was a teenager with a multicolored bird in his paws. The young resident, who looked more like a small cat, was more amazed by the result than anyone else. Harley was disappointed. He did not understand why the honorary title did not go to him, but the conditions of the competition stated that the winner would be the one who brought not the largest animal, but the tasty game. The governor could not believe that he had lost to a child. The leader explained her idea. The chieftain must choose the right prey to feed the tribe. No one dared to challenge the leader's decision, and she ordered the fire to be lit. It was time to start cooking the meat and begin the feast. Everyone supported the leader. Only little Sasha was sad. She understood that she would not be able to lead the adult hunters. The protagonist was secretly glad that it wasn't Charlie who won. It was unknown how the visit to the beastmen settlement could have ended. Lucas decided to have a bite to eat and head home. Game was roasting on several fires. The supply of meat and blood was unbearable. The young cook was surprised that spices were not used at all in the village. Even little Luna refused to eat the cooked meat. The wolf cub could not breathe from the stench that enveloped the entire settlement of half-beasts. The main character tried to contain his emotions, but he couldn't take the knuckle in his mouth and decided to try to cook the game himself. The young man took out the cutlery that he always took with him on picnics. The meat was cut into small pieces and placed on a hot baking sheet until a crispy crust formed. Then the cook took out a cauldron and poured alcohol into it. At this time, the shaggy assistant returned, who had gone into the forest for sour fruits. Everyone was waiting impatiently for the meat to soak in the strange marinade. After half an hour, aromatic smells began to emerge from the pan. Martin took the product out of the container with alcohol and was afraid to inhale it. However, the stench disappeared, and the main character continued to cut the meat into thin pieces. Samantha was the first to risk trying it, and it worked. The leader was surprised by her impressions, not believing that this was the game they had caught. But the young man was dissatisfied with the result and wanted to try to cook the catch again. The leader and her charges began to wait for a new portion of meat. Mother Moon liked the man. He was calm and behaved bravely, but he was a guest, and she wanted him to rest too. Martin was surprised when the village mistress ordered the villagers to repeat the boy's experience, take alcohol and fruit to soak and cook the meat. Samantha thanked the young man for the lesson. The tribe itself had to prepare the game that they caught during the hunt. The beastmen approached the cook for advice. He told them what fruits would be best and how long it would take for the smell of blood to disappear. The well-fed Moon did not leave her mother, who was glad to have met a human. The day flew by unnoticed. Evening came. It was time for the main character and his assistant to return home. Samantha thanked him for the lessons on behalf of all the tribe members. Liam had to take his new friends to the clearing where their campsite was usually located. As a parting gift, the leader gave Martin a small gift. The young man thanked the leader. The whistle was proof of friendship with the beastmen and could be used to call them for help. As he fell asleep, the main character thought that he would never forget this day. A strange man appeared in the restaurant in the morning. The owner of the establishment watched in surprise as the man tried to hide his appearance behind dark glasses and a hat. The young chef brought the menu and was ready to take orders. The stranger could not believe that he had found himself in a real restaurant in a remote place. The man wanted spaghetti vongole to be cooked for him, Martin met his first person in the village who knew about Italian cuisine and offered him linguine, which was only slightly different from the dish he had ordered. The stranger was at a loss from surprise and was satisfied with the replacement. The man still couldn't believe that the owner of the establishment was familiar with pasta. The young man received the order and went to the kitchen. The young man understood that the guest was knowledgeable about European food products and knew exactly what he wanted. Linguine is denser than regular spaghetti and is usually served with seafood. Martin was glad to have met a connoisseur of Italian cuisine. He had not had a chance to show what he was capable of for a long time. After some time, the order was displayed on a plate in front of the visitor. The stranger was shocked. The smell was very aromatic. All that was left was to try the prepared food to taste. The man slowly brought the paste to his mouth. After trying the first portion, Mr. George appreciated the dish. Despite the presence of shellfish, the smell of fish was absent, and there was just enough spice to emphasize the taste. The visitor was surprised again. Not every restaurant in the city could boast of such quality. The man put down his cutlery and thought. The main character heard his name being called and turned away from the TV in time. On the screen was the same man who was now sitting at the table next to him. He was a famous artist who left his mark on the history of world art. The owner of the establishment only saw that the strange man had completely hidden his head in his cloak. He thought that his dish was not liked. However, the stranger thanked him for the quality of the preparation and was about to leave. The protagonist told the guest that he was the first visitor who knew a lot about Italian dishes. Martin learned that the man had become familiar with European cuisine in his youth when he was studying abroad. The cook invited the strange man to come more often. He could cook any dish. George asked if he could make a vegetable soup with pasta called minestrone, which the whole family usually ate. The chef was ready to fulfill the order within half an hour. The man promised to drop by the next day and went outside. The famous artist was glad that he visited the restaurant. Before leaving, the stranger met the owner and called him a real master. He was looking forward to tomorrow. The name of the famous artist was known to almost everyone. Martin was surprised when the guest introduced himself. The main character returned to the TV, where the program about the star visitor continued. The next day, Charlie was sleeping peacefully in the yard when he heard the delighted cries of his two-legged friend. The main character enthusiastically greeted the famous artist who came in for lunch. Mr. George was modest. He did not want to be recognized by others at all. The elderly man simply dropped in to enjoy some good food and reminisce about his youth. The young chef brought minestrone and wished him bon appétit. The aromatic smell of soup spread throughout the room. The man took the spoon and thought again. Martin watched the visitor's reaction with slight fear. George said that he had only eaten such a dish in Italy. The taste was real, but his look was sad. The man remembered the distant years when he went abroad to study in pursuit of his dream. The student did not have enough money, so he tried to do any work to buy brushes and paints. The young artist was forced to eat only pasta. When the young man managed to sell his painting, he would throw a party and go to the same small restaurant. At that time, a plate of vegetable soup was a treasure for him, which he could order from a formidable silent waitress. After some time, the aspiring artist received a lucrative offer and left the country, and from then on he avoided Italian cuisine. Many years later, the famous artist realized that his past memories were dear to him, so he wanted to taste that cheap minestrone again. Martin listened with interest to the visitor's story. The man was a little upset. Now the taste of the soup seemed completely different to him. The young man was also upset. He wished his interlocutor success in searching for a past feeling. The young man remembered how difficult it was for him to survive in another country when he left to study, dreaming of becoming an outstanding chef. George thanked the guy who listened to him and got ready to leave. The young chef asked to tell what the dish looked like, its smell and features. He really wanted to help the guest. The man noted that the soup was less tasty, but the broth was thicker, the vegetables were the cheapest, and it had a fishy taste, since the town was located on the coast and everything there smelled of seafood. Martin thought about it and invited George to come see him the next day. The little helper licked his lips with pleasure, preparing to try the food. In the evening, the protagonist once again analyzed the words of the famous artist. The ingredients of the soup changed depending on where and who prepared it. The fishy taste indicated that it could have been kakuko soup with seafood. The cook thought that his visitor was well versed in the dishes and could not confuse the names. The young man continued searching the internet for information that could help him. The young man decided to find information about the place where the aspiring painter lived. The Italian city of Amalfi was the ancient capital of a maritime republic, and was located in a beautiful place at the mouth of a deep gorge, surrounded by picturesque cliffs and coastal landscapes. The cook looked at the beautiful resort places with admiration. Gradually, Martin figured it all out and was ready to try again to make the soup that the famous guest had recalled. The young cook started working early in the morning. Closer to lunchtime, a bell rang, warning of a visitor. The main character has been waiting for Mr. George for a long time. The young chef invited the guest to sit at the table. The artist also did not waste time and found information about a local chef who recently became the youngest winner of several culinary shows. Martin brought out a tray from the kitchen with a small saucepan covered with a lid. Now the man knew where the brilliant chef came from in the distant village. George didn't expect results. He thanked the guy in advance for listening to him. Just the attention of a stranger was enough for him. The young man understood the mood of the guest, who had visited many establishments in pursuit of that very taste of youth. No one had tried to do anything for the visitor, so Martin now prepared to lift the lid with satisfaction. The famous artist perked up. He smelled a familiar fishy smell. Today, the minestrone looked completely different. The broth was foaming. It was hard to imagine that the two different soups were prepared by the same person. Despite the fact that the dish looked disgusting, the man dared to take a spoon. After trying the first portion, George froze. The visitor thought that if he tried this soup for the first time now, he would immediately pour it out. But in the old days, this was his dream. The cherished taste of youth once again stirred up memories. A small room with a view of the sea, a breath of wind, and the smell of paints flashed through the artist's head. The guest sat motionless for several minutes, reliving moments from his past life. The man was happy. He no longer believed that he would ever meet his dream again. However, it was impossible to eat this soup now. Martin explained how much time it took him to figure out what was going on. At first, the cook tried to make a cachuco broth, but even its taste did not have a strong smell. Then the young man began to work on the composition of the dish, guessing that seafood was chopped into ordinary minestrone. George couldn't believe it. The restaurant chef couldn't make such a soup. It was hard to believe that he wanted to make fun of the customers. The young man suggested that one of the kitchen workers might have added the shellfish secretly. The man remembered the cook, who was worried about the boy and concerned about his health, knowing how hard it was for him to be away from home. The caring woman did not want to hurt the guy's pride and prepared a special dish with healthy additives for him. If he had guessed about it, he would never have come there again. The famous painter remembered that one of the workers constantly asked him about everything. Now he understood everything. George said goodbye and said that his villa was located nearby, so he would occasionally drop by the restaurant. Before leaving, the man noticed the empty walls of the establishment and asked not to tell anyone about his visits. Martin was surprised by the guest's words. A cool car and a personal driver indicated high status, so George would not be able to hide his location. Suddenly, a familiar voice from behind asked about the guest. Not believing his ears, the protagonist looked back. An old friend with a suitcase stood nearby. He again did not warn of his arrival. Martin was angry at Dennis's actions. A friend told me that on vacation, instead of going abroad, he decided to stay for 3 days at a friend's place, where it's beautiful and quiet, and where there's always delicious food. The young man appreciated the repairs that his humble friend had done. An old friend noticed a puppy sleeping peacefully on his soft bed in the room. He had not noticed before that the cook loved pets. Dennis decided to pet the cute animal. Martin knew that Charlie didn't allow anyone to touch him except him. The friend was surprised by the change in the chef's mood. He had come to brighten up his loneliness in the distant wilderness. But he realized that he was not welcome. Dennis was interested in how the young man was getting along with the local population. The comrade listened with pity to the story of how the villagers had arranged a celebration in honor of the restaurant owner. The cook tried to convince his friend that he was not bored away from the capital. The sound of a bell rang, indicating a new visitor. Adam was passing by and dropped in to visit Martin. The owner of the establishment was glad to meet us and offered to have lunch. However, the head of the Lee family dropped by for a few minutes to deliver a surprise from his wife. Grace felt good and sewed a gift for the kitchen. The cook couldn't believe that the beautiful mittens were made by his neighbor's hands. Charlie was pleased to see his image on the potholders. The young man thanked the farmer and his attentive wife and promised to definitely use the valuable item. Adam didn't have time to leave when the children entered the restaurant. Bob and Kara shared the good news with their older friend. Their holidays had begun. The boy bragged about his grades and said that he had taken homework for the summer. The next visitor was the village elder. Henry was passing by and saw that the doors were open, so he just went in to say hello to the boy. Dennis heard loud voices and began to watch his friend through the neighboring window with great surprise. The young chef was surrounded by new friends on all sides. The main character really looked rested and smiled happily. The young man was a little upset. He had come to the wilderness to keep his old friend company, but he didn't need it at all. Dennis decided to just relax, noticing that Martin had now learned to communicate with people. At this time, the young man asked the elder what was troubling him. Henry was urgently looking for helpers for the farm. The young man decided to teach a lesson to his friend who liked to come uninvited. The headman needed extra hands for just a couple of days. Martin told his neighbor that he had little work at the moment and was ready to help, but he had an uninvited guest. Henry was a little upset and was about to go on searching. The protagonist thought about his plan again and informed the headman that the next morning 2 assistants would be ready to come to the villagers. An unsuspecting Dennis was watching his favorite entertainment show. Early in the morning, Martin woke up his friend. Birds were singing outside, and it was very beautiful. The city boy had never worked in the field before. Several villagers were weeding. The young cook helped harvest the first potato crop. The main character had already walked through all the beds and did not feel tired at all. The young man thought that without daily training with Francis, he would not have been able to complete the assigned task so easily. Old Lady Barbara noticed that Dennis had been resting for a long time after his unusual work. The friend looked at his comrade with displeasure. He did not expect such an act from him. Having finished their business, the friends took their plates with gusto. The restaurant owner prepared food for all the neighbors in advance. Dennis grumbled about being forced to work on his precious vacation and admired the local scenery with admiration. Martin promised that in payment he would fulfill any order his friend gave him. In the evening, the cook began preparing the jambalaya that his friend had dreamed of. The young chef decided to treat Dennis to seafood. The comrade watched the cooking process with delight, not understanding how his old friend could work miracles in the kitchen. The sausages, shrimp, and rice were ready. All that was left was to add the spices. After 2 hours, this amazing Creole dish had steeped and was finally ready. Dennis watched with curiosity as the shaggy pet pounced on his portion. Sitting at the table, Martin asked why his friend had chosen to order the inexpensive dish. The young man remembered their first meeting when a modest guy came to visit him. The chef's apprentice refused to go to the cafe and suggested cooking something tasty at home. Then Dennis was surprised that the guy quickly made a gorgeous dish from a modest set of products. Now everything looked even better, and the friend believed that Martin would do well and be successful. The young cook told his friend the good news. His sense of taste was gradually returning. Dennis enjoyed the food he had prepared and couldn't believe his friend's words. The old comrades sat at the table, sharing their impressions. The young man thought that it would be really good to recover in a distant village and suggested that Martin return to the capital after his recovery. The furry assistant heard the news and looked closely at the cook. The main character thought about it. He was not ready to go back to where he was constantly scolded and insulted for an unknown reason, so at first he was afraid of the city. But now he began to like living in the wilderness. Dennis understood the cook's condition. They had been together for several years. A friend advised Martin to take his time and continue his rehabilitation. A friend suggested celebrating a quiet country life. The cook was glad that he had a friend who understood and supported him. The friends raised their improvised glasses, or rather cans of beer, and drank to the bottom. The whole night, the young men reminisced about past years and laughed merrily. The next day, Dennis left, and the young cook again went to another world which he told no one about. This time, the night captain demonstrated sword-fighting techniques. Training took place almost every day. Despite the fact that the young man had become stronger, Francis easily managed to knock the weapon out of his hands. The guard praised his friend for his tenacity and persistence. However, Martin doubted that he would be able to last more than 5 seconds in the fight. Suddenly, Francis heard some strange sounds in the forest and looked towards the thicket. Liam came out into the clearing with his ward. Luna was glad to meet a man. The night captain made sure that the young cook was familiar with the beastmen, and the chieftain's assistant greeted the unfamiliar warrior. It suddenly turned out that Martin was the only one who understood the language of the half-beasts. The others needed a translation artifact to talk. Liam asked his new acquaintance to clarify what the man had told him. The young man was taken aback. He had never even thought about why he understood other people's speech. Francis decided that the beastmen had come to the cook for a reason, so he suggested finishing the training. The captain of the knights said goodbye and went home. Martin asked Liam what had happened and why they had come. The bodyguard replied that his little charge was bored and wanted to see a person. When asked about the sword, Martin said that the warrior began teaching him martial arts as a token of gratitude for delicious food. Liam walked thoughtfully around the clearing. He too received treats from the young chef. The protagonist watched the half-beast with apprehension. Finally, the assistant of the leader of the beastmen tribe returned. He considered that he should pay for the pleasure at least twice and repay the kindness with kindness. Martin tried to refuse, sensing something bad was going to happen. He shared the food free of charge without expecting any payment for the treats. However, Liam was persistent. He also wanted to teach his new acquaintance the martial arts of his tribe. The young man was very upset. He had enough stress from training with the sword, but he did not want to offend the half-beasts. Luna's bodyguard was ready to conduct the first lesson immediately. Martin had to get down on all fours. Walking on all fours was the basic rule of the race. Until the morning, the main character could not fall asleep after jogging in an unusual position. His body ached much more than after training with the knight. Charlie was nearby, trying to help his poor friend. The young man could not move. Every muscle was shaking from the strain. A new day dawned. Martin rose with difficulty and tried to stretch his aching body. The furry friend licked his sore muscles all night long. His saliva really did have healing properties. The protagonist thanked the assistant, thinking that his human dignity had been broken. It was time to clean the kitchen and take stock of the food. The cook thought about the fact that the beastmen do not use spices at all. The young man remembered the terrible smell that had filled the werewolf village during the feast. Charlie also agreed that eating tasty meat was much more enjoyable. Martin thought about teaching his new friends how to cook properly. However, it was inconvenient to bring spices to another world every time, so the young chef decided to find a solution to the problem on the spot and went to visit Francis. The small town welcomed the knight captain's friend. The main character did not expect to be greeted with such honors. The man was glad that Martin visited him, but in his heart he was offended that the guy had been in the settlement of another race before the people. Francis and his guest walked through the line of knights greeting the unfamiliar guest. The guard said that he held a high position in his city and was ready to meet the young man with all the honors. He had something to show at home. Suddenly, a strange man appeared on the parade ground. A man with a gray beard and a hood hiding his face became interested in the boy he had heard about from the stories of the older knight. Francis greeted the old man. Martin was surprised. He wanted to see the stranger's face. As if hearing the young man's thoughts, the mysterious man removed his hood. The main character guessed who was in front of him by his clothes, staff, and beard. The real magician stood opposite the young cook and looked at the guest. A wizard named Janice greeted Martin and decided to show him his abilities. The sorcerer began to launch fireworks using his staff. Those around watched the fireworks with delight, but it was difficult to surprise the young man with something like that. The capital often hosted celebrations with numerous volleys and amazing lights. Martin compared the miracle to an ordinary sparkler. The magician noticed that the guest was not very surprised by what he saw. Francis and Janice suggested that the guy take a look at the city. In order not to attract the attention of passers-by, the young man had to change into local clothes. The captain of the knights knew why the young man had come and let him go with the sorcerer to the market, going about his business. Martin looked with admiration at the numerous fruits and vegetables that were slightly different from the plants he was used to. Before leaving, Francis warned the young man that he would come for him to a party he was throwing in honor of a friend at his home. The main character walked through the rows with great surprise. He could not have imagined that the local bazaar would be so big. The chef's attention was drawn to an item that looked like a hot pepper. Martin smelled the green stuff and couldn't figure out where it could be used. Janice rushed to help. This product could be used as a vegetable. The captain of the knights specially sent the magician along with the guest to avoid possible conflicts and misunderstandings. The faithful, shaggy assistant did not lag behind his friend and followed him everywhere. At first, the young man was surprised by the chief guard's decision to give him an escort. The old man asked the seller to pack the edible item called frames that interested the young man. The young man looked at the package with curiosity, not yet understanding where he could try this vegetable. The young chef wanted to go further for spices and herbs. Having walked around the entire market, Martin and the sorcerer decided to take a rest. The young man held a large bag with food that was valuable to him and thanked the old man for his help. The chef was already dreaming about how he would experiment with new flavors. Janice couldn't understand why the guest needed so many spices. The main character said that he was not going to write scientific articles but simply wanted to teach and feed his friends. But first, try new tastes himself. The magician listened thoughtfully to the guy's words. The white wolf cub was also tired from the long walk and was sleeping peacefully on the bench. The main character prepared for the journey, so he took a supply of food with him. Martin opened the container and offered Janice a snack. The pancakes looked very appetizing. The old man could not refuse the tempting offer. The magician carefully took one envelope. Having put the pancake in his mouth, The wizard froze. He had never experienced such a taste in his life. The protagonist watched the reaction of the attendant. Janice happily asked for another piece. The elder was surprised by the smell and taste of unknown vegetables that were baked in a delicate, thin dough. The sorcerer ate, and Martin inquired why Francis had ordered that he be accompanied into the city, thinking that the main reason might be thieves or robbers. The magician didn't have time to answer. Suddenly, Charlie woke up and growled. Janice said that white wolves are ancient, noble animals, but there are creatures that do not respect them, including people. One of these was the chief bishop, Charles, who happened to be passing by at the time with his assistants. The priest stopped to greet the strange company. Charles was surprised. In recent years, the magician practically never left his laboratory. He was even more amazed by the presence of the wolf cub. Janice said that he loved to walk in the fresh air, and he was also interested in what Charles was doing at the market. The main character watched the conversation between two high-ranking officials with excitement. At the moment, the bishop was interested in who was the owner of the white predator. Charlie growled menacingly. Martin felt that he had already been in a similar situation in the village of beastmen. In the werewolf settlement, aggression was directed at the guest. The governor could not accept the presence of a human in his home. Now the young man understood that the church ministers were afraid of his shaggy friend. Charles insisted that the young man go with him to the temple along with his pet. The magician intervened in the conversation and warned the bishop that the young man was a guest and friend of the captain of the knights, to whom he was currently showing the city. The priest was amazed that the sorcerer himself was personally accompanying the stranger. The assistant confirmed the wizard's words. The young man really did look like the man who had been greeted by the squad of knights that morning. Martin held his shaggy friend tightly and watched his interlocutor's reaction carefully. The bishop apologized and suggested postponing the meeting until another time if such an opportunity arose. The magician sat calmly on the bench. He understood that he had done an excellent job with his task. Only now the main character noticed that the sorcerer's staff was burning with a bright light, which meant he had to use his abilities. The temple servants left. Janice calmed down and explained that these people were more dangerous than robbers. Then for 3 hours, the wizard told the guest about the formulas with which he controls magic. When Francis came for the young man, he was already completely tired of the flow of unnecessary information. The captain of the knights took the guy to his home, where his colleagues were already waiting for them. Those present looked with curiosity at the unfamiliar guy whom their commander personally met. Martin was upset by all the attention and sat at the table with a sad look. The hostess of the house approached the guest and offered to try the meat. Kate was delighted to meet the chef she had heard so much about from her husband. The warriors listened attentively to the conversation, learning that Martin had become one of Francis's few disciples. The daughter of the owner of the house sat down at the table next to the young man. The little girl really liked the furry animal. Her father persuaded her to eat the food and then feed the wolf cub. However, the main character doubted that his shaggy assistant would wait until he was given food. Charlie was already traveling around the plates, destroying pieces of meat. Martin decided to try the local alcohol. The drink was not very tasty. It was clear why Francis kept asking to treat him to beer. There was a large portion of meat on the plate. The main character noticed the oven in which the captain's wife was roasting game. The device was quite compact and had a spit to make it easier to turn the pieces. The young man tasted the meat. The product clearly lacked spices. The young chef tried to determine what herbs the housewife used. Francis said that his wife bought spices at the market and most often added osilia, which was brought from far away. Martin was pleased that he had acquired this potion too. The main character was upset that there were few special herbs growing in the forests. They had to be brought from far away. The young man hoped that he would be able to study local plants and use them in the kitchen. The cook was upset that the beastmen would not be able to show the necessary seasonings for preparing delicious meat. The knight captain also understood that it was impossible to deliver a large amount of spices to the settlement of the neighboring race. Trade between people and the tribe had ended more than 100 years ago. Martin listened attentively to the story of another world. Suddenly, Francis jumped up. He thought that together with his young friend, he would be able to establish communication between different creatures again. The young man learned that there was a chief lord in the city who was in charge of all matters, including trade. A frustrated Kate returned from the cellar. Given the large number of guests, the alcohol was almost gone. The main character remembered that he came with gifts. After a few minutes, the knights were happily trying the unfamiliar drinks. Francis was the happiest of all. He already knew the delicious taste of beer. Martin didn't know how to answer the numerous questions about where to buy these bottles. The young man did not expect such a joyful reaction from the local residents. The main character told those present that the taste can be improved by mixing 2 alcoholic drinks of different strengths. The knights looked with admiration at the genius who knew the secrets of drinking. Martin received the knowledge from a friend during the celebration of another victory, who shared information on what proportions to mix the potion in. There were cries of delight from all sides. Those around really liked the new taste. The knights tried to find out whether it was possible to change the composition of alcoholic drinks and their quantity. After a couple of hours, the main character was the only one left on his feet. The entire knightly order slept in various positions right at the tables and on the floor in the house of their commander. The next morning, as usual, training took place. The knights discussed meeting a man from another country. They had already heard that the guest had become the captain's apprentice, and they wanted to fight him. The morning sparring was weak. The soldiers had not yet recovered from the party. The warriors recalled the delicious alcoholic drinks that the young man treated them to. Francis held up better than anyone else. He was already thinking about when to invite his young friend to visit again. There was also a slight commotion in the restaurant building. Martin realized that he had also overdone it with beer consumption, trying to bring his body back to its usual state. The main character decided to make Bob's cherished dream come true and collected the necessary things. All that remained was to find a place for Charlie, whom the young man was afraid to take with him to the big city. The baby was delighted when he was called, expecting a tasty treat. However, for the first time, the cook put a collar on his friend and took a leash, entrusting the pet to the headman for the duration of the trip. Zhang sent her daughter and her friend on a long journey. Bob's grandmother thanked the cook for going to show the children the capital. Martin took full responsibility for the neighboring boy and girl. Promises had to be kept. Dennis, at his friend's request, drove his car to the restaurant. The Vietnamese girl was happy that Kara would see a new city and have some fun. Henry noticed that the young man had changed a lot. He had become completely different from the guy who had come to the village some time ago. The main character was a little afraid of returning to the past. Martin apologized to Bob for delaying the promised trip to the city. The children were happy. They had never traveled so far from the village. Now Dennis understood why his friend wanted to visit the capital. On the way, the travelers discussed the plan. The first thing they needed to do was go to the amusement park. Martin hoped that he hadn't been on TV for a long time, so people had forgotten him. A friend advised the chef to wear a cap to change his appearance. The comrade was surprised by the main character's decision to go to a crowded place. He couldn't even think about it before. The driver looked in the rearview mirror and thought he saw a white, fluffy ball. At this time, the headman was asking the villagers if anyone had seen Charlie, who had easily gotten out of the collar and escaped. The huge amusement park welcomed its visitors. The children were absolutely delighted. They wanted to ride all the rides. Martin felt unwell again and tried to hide his face from the crowd of people. It seemed to the main character that everyone was looking at and recognizing the cook. The young man didn't know what to do. His body was shaking with fear. Bob saw that the young man was shaking with fear and took him by the hand. The children thought that Martin was simply afraid of the slides and reassured him, saying that they were with him, so he wouldn't be scared. The main character was surprised. The feeling of anxiety subsided and he felt better. Dennis watched his friend closely, noticing that he had really changed lately. Out of boredom, the friend wanted to laugh at the young man's ability to cope well with the role of nanny. An old friend noticed that here and there groups of curious people were gathering, looking at something interesting. The travelers were riding the roller coaster. They could not notice how the fluffy lump was actively running away from the guards and strangers, trying to keep up with its owner everywhere. The park was closed to animals, so workers couldn't figure out how the white puppy managed to get there. As promised, Martin took the kids to a cafe to try hamburgers. Bob was finally convinced that his adult friend cooks better than anyone. The room was quiet. The young patient looked out the window with longing. She had already spent several months in the hospital and missed her child. Suddenly, a child's cry was heard. Bob ran impatiently down the hospital corridor. The woman couldn't believe she was seeing her son. The boy hugged his beloved mother and cried with joy. Martin and Kara stood nearby so as not to interfere with the close relatives' communication with each other. The girl remembered her mother with sadness and decided that it was time to return home. Bob didn't want to leave. He wished his mother to get well soon. He missed her very much. Late in the evening, the bus brought the travelers to their native village. The children happily hugged their relatives, sharing with them their impressions of the trip. The protagonist was glad that he was able to fulfill his promise. Suddenly, an exhausted Charlie appeared on the road, barely dragging his paws. Martin didn't understand where the baby came from. He was dirty and breathing heavily. The young man took his furry friend in his arms and promised to take him with him next time. He also missed his pet. The night flew by unnoticed, and in the morning the friends again set off on a hike to another world. Now, Martin had learned how to quickly set up a tent and make a fire. Thanks to the supplies, the food was cooked quickly. Luna was already waiting for the time when she could eat tasty meat again. The young cook decided to try local herbs that he bought together with the magician at the market. Now the meat of the animal, similar to an ostrich, had completely changed its smell and looked very appetizing. The chef started experimenting with the new spices 2 weeks ago and has already achieved good results. The dishes turned out to be much tastier and more filling than before. Judging by the rapid emptying of the plate, Luna liked the food too. Martin was happily thinking about sharing secrets with Francis's wife and the beastmen, and he didn't notice that he was being closely watched again from a nearby tree. The stranger in the hooded cloak met a strange guy several times who was constantly cooking. The observer was surprised that the unknown young man was always accompanied by a white wolf cub and a little half-beast girl. At first, the girl considered the young man suspicious until she became convinced that he did nothing but eat. Delicious smells reached even the high branches of the tree. The guard didn't immediately notice that the fluffy lump had disappeared. He could easily have found her, given his origin. The stranger did not have time to hide. Looking back, she saw the wolf cub sitting next to her on a thick branch. Charlie greeted the intruder with a loud bark, giving away her location, and she fell head over heels in surprise. The main character heard his friend's voice and looked around. The bushes nearby began to rustle, and Martin went to look for the baby in the thickets, worried that he had managed to catch some prey again and would have to cook again. Parting the branches, the young man saw a strange stranger. The elf girl sat on the ground and could not believe that she had fallen from a tree. This had never happened in their tribe before. A blue bird with a sharp beak and large claws was already flying to help its owner. Martin couldn't get close enough to help the stranger up. The girl's name was Abigail. She was very upset that the man saw her from a weak side and asked not to tell anyone about the meeting. The main character again did not understand what was happening. He had never seen elves before. A few moments later, only a light trace and a dagger, which its owner accidentally dropped, remained from the unexpected guests. Charlie sat in a tree, causing the young man to think that he was the reason for the girl's sudden fall. The wolf cub's eyes shone radiantly, as if he was hearing about the incident for the first time. Martin felt uncomfortable. He heard a story about a third humanoid race existing in this world. Now he wanted to apologize for Charlie's behavior. A small, sharp dagger lay on the grass. The main character picked it up and decided to hide it until the next meeting. Luna's indignant cries distracted the cook's attention. Liam caught the naughty girl and said hello to the cook. The little girl ran away from the village again. This time, the mother decided to punish her daughter. The chief of the beastmen tribe asked her assistant to find and bring the child to the village. Liam knew very well where Luna might have gone, so finding her was not difficult for him. Suddenly, the bodyguard fell silent. He smelled the elves. Martin suggested that the scent came from the weapon that the intruder had lost. The main character began to tell that he met an elf who fell from a tree. Then he remembered her request and fell silent. Liam couldn't believe that representatives of one of the most ancient races could fall from a height. Charlie was mysteriously silent. The young man didn't know what to say next, so as not to let the girl down. Samantha's assistant looked at the man with disbelief. To change the subject of the conversation, Martin offered his guests something to eat. Liam wasn't hungry, but his new friend didn't want to let him go just like that. The cook prepared the ingredients for the shashlik in advance, and a few minutes later the meat was already grilling. The moon's bodyguard got his share. Martin tried to restrain the little ones who were ready to snatch tasty morsels right from the guard's clawed paws. The fluffy tail betrayed the feelings of the beastman, who really liked the treat. The cook promised to wrap up the products for him to take home so that he could enjoy the delicious meat again at home. Abigail was patrolling the forest again, her spirit bird Sona by her side. The elf was still upset that a stranger saw her. Suddenly the girl felt someone's presence. Liam walked calmly along the forest path. He had no one to hide from. The representatives of the two races greeted each other, and the half-beast was interested in why his interlocutor was watching the cook. Abigail explained that this forest was common to all the tribes, and strange things had been happening there lately, so she had been watching the stranger. Samantha's assistant reported that the young man was a friend of the beastmen. The elf looked closely at her unexpected interlocutor. Liam looked impressive. His strong aura indicated that he was one of the strongest warriors of his tribe. In the half-beast's hand was an incomprehensible object that emitted a fragrant smell. The girl promised that she would stop following him if the stranger did not behave suspiciously. While Martin was enjoying the village life, the capital was in full swing. One of the television workers was rushing to her friend to pick up some forgotten things from his car. Dennis was surprised. Filming was supposed to be taking place at that time, but Jessica was on break. The conversation was interrupted by a phone call. The young man looked dissatisfied. The conversation was very short. The singer's manager looked thoughtfully at the received message. His friend sent him money for gas for the last trip with the neighbor's children. The presenter looked at her colleague. Judging by Martin's behavior, he was completely different from what he was portrayed as on social networks. Numerous comments and rumors said that the famous chef had developed star fever. Although his skill level was weak, his good looks were the only advantage of the young man. Dennis shared that his friend had many envious people because he always told the truth. The manager said that Martin was unlucky. He ran into a competitor who had an inferiority complex, and he was the main distributor of dirty gossip. Chef Warren was jealous of his talented colleague's success and tried in every way to get rid of him, reporting false information to reporters and on the internet. While Dennis was talking to his friend's rival got out of a car parked nearby. Jessica was the first to see the man. She realized who they were talking about and warned her colleague. Ever dissatisfied with everything, Warren headed to the TV studio building. The manager advised his girlfriend to avoid this guy. The girl was shocked by the information she received. She had previously thought that both chefs were friends. She had once been invited to a culinary show as an independent judge. Martin's colleague came to the television center to discuss his participation in the new program. While waiting to meet with the director, the man looked at the news on the internet. One of the fans posted a photo of the main character in an amusement park, suggesting in the comments that the young chef came there with his nephews. Warren was upset. He heard that his lucky rival had injured his arm and was away for treatment. But in fact, he was healthy and having fun in the city. Kevin, the new chef friend he had brought onto his team, looked at the picture. The young man couldn't understand what was bothering his friend, who had recently helped him get a job. An older friend explained to the boy that he needed to choose the right team in order to win. Kevin listened attentively to his experienced colleague. Warren couldn't calm down after seeing the joyful look on his old rival's face. The young chef asked his friend if the rumors about the famous chef's loss of taste were true. Martin's enemy knew he had a broken arm, and it was the first time he had heard of his rival's other health problems. Warren was very pleased with the information he received. Kevin was surprised that his boss didn't know about this. The cameraman warned the guests that it was time to get ready for filming. However, in the head of the envious person, a cunning plan of revenge was already maturing. The famous chef told the new team member that a new culinary show would soon take place, to which famous masters were invited. Warren was already dreaming of finally destroying Martin. The main character did not suspect anything. He worked calmly in his establishment. In the morning, Mr. George came into the restaurant again. This time, the famous artist ordered pizza. The painter was glad that his villa was nearby, so he had the opportunity to enjoy delicious food. The restaurant owner thanked his new acquaintance for the gift. His painting fit perfectly into the restaurant's interior. George asked the chef to prepare him a portion of vongole. He liked to open the shellfish himself while eating. Martin was once again surprised by his guest's knowledge of Italian cuisine. Suddenly the phone rang, and it was Dennis on the other end. A friend suddenly asked what his comrade was doing and whether he was going to take part in the new competition. The artist listened attentively to someone else's conversation. The manager quickly ended the conversation. He was glad that Martin didn't know anything and advised him to stay off the internet for a while. The restaurant owner didn't understand anything and was upset. To figure it out, the young man opened the news and learned that someone had confirmed on his behalf his return to the capital and participation in a star culinary show. Once again, numerous comments on social networks poured out streams of dirt on the famous young chef. Martin was shocked. He didn't know who could give an interview to journalists instead of him. No one even invited him to the filming. George watched his young friend, not knowing how to help him. The restaurant owner began to analyze the information he received. The young man shuddered. He remembered how it all ended the last time when he couldn't withstand the psychological stress and broke down. The painter was frightened. He saw that the boy turned pale and was ready to faint. The artist suggested calling an ambulance, but the cook seemed not to hear him. Martin tried to pull himself together and relax. After some time, the young man felt better. He calmed the worried guest and went to the kitchen. The protagonist did not know who his enemy was, but he hoped that recovery in the wilderness and another world had a beneficial effect on his health. The chef read the news about his participation in the show again and decided to simply ignore it. The chef promised the visitor to make an order within half an hour. However, George still didn't like the look of his new acquaintance. The artist could not understand what could have frightened and upset the young restaurant owner. After seeing off the guest, the main character went on a camping trip to rest. Martin looked at the starry sky and tried to calm himself. In the afternoon, Dennis called and said that the police promised to look into the matter and find the person who published the article, and the press was also preparing a refutation of the rumors. The cook sat by the fire and thought that he had at least one true friend who had supported him more than once in difficult times. To finally distract himself from his thoughts, the main character began to count the stars. Martin was distracted by the noise. His tailed friend had returned from hunting. The prey was very small for Charlie. He easily dealt with the giant predators that lived in these places on his own. This time, he had a small bird in his teeth. A frightened Abigail ran after the wolf cub. The elf was very worried about her feathered companion. Martin was forced to apologize for his shaggy assistant. The girl was surprised that the man also had the ability to see spirits just like the white wolf. Abigail knew that few people were given such opportunities, and she couldn't believe that the stranger was not lying. The main character did not understand what was being discussed. He saw a small blue bird with a long beak and wings, which the guest called Sona. The elf still knew nothing about the suspicious guest. Martin remembered something and reached into his backpack. The young man returned to the girl the dagger that she had lost during her unexpected fall from the tree. Abigail thanked the stranger. She was starting to like him a little. The new acquaintances began to talk, and the bird carefully hid behind the back of its owner. The main character offered to treat the guest to meat, but she ate only plant foods. Martin didn't want to let the girl go and decided to quickly cook the vegetables. Within minutes, the shiny lumps were baking in the flames of the fire. Abigail looked at the strange object the young man handed her with disbelief. A small hot metal ball lay on the palms of his hands. The cook removed the foil he had used to keep the potatoes from burning. The elf saw such food for the first time. The strange delicacy gave off an appetizing smell, and a little oil made the vegetables softer. The girl couldn't resist. The delicious aroma spread around. The guest carefully took a small piece into her mouth. Abigail immediately appreciated the sweet taste, which she really liked. Until now, the elf thought that human food was sharp and disgusting. The shaggy assistant was actively destroying the baked potato, dreaming of a piece of meat. The guest thanked the young man for the treat. They had a similar vegetable, but it was not as tasty as this dish. Martin was absent-minded. He hardly heard what the girl was saying. The protagonist apologized and asked to repeat what Abigail said. Only now did the elf notice that the man's behavior had changed today. It was clear that something was bothering him. The young man was thoughtful and quiet, simply looking at the beautiful scenery around him. Abigail sat down by the fire to ask the stranger about his problems. Martin shared his thoughts with his guest. The cook didn't like the rumors that were constantly spread about him. He couldn't understand who hated him and why. The representative of another race listened attentively to the incomprehensible words about another life. The main character said that he hid in the wilderness to avoid gossip and envious glances. The girl told her new acquaintance about the trials that elves must go through to become adults. The initiation ceremony is very difficult for young individuals. Members of the race live very long lives, during which they have to experience many difficult events. Abigail said that each of them has moments when the pain becomes unbearable. The guest approached the lake and took a sip of water. The elf thought, remembering her years. The girl looked at the stars. The main thing for her and the others was the strength to face this pain. Abigail was glad to share her knowledge with her new acquaintance. The main character realized that even if he ran away and hid, the problem would not go away. At parting, the guest expressed hope that the young man would not give up everything he had worked for many years because of someone else's opinion. The elf thanked the cook once again for the treat and said goodbye until the next meeting. Martin was left alone, pondering the girl's words. The young man understood the meaning of the ceremony and decided to act. The young man woke up his little friend. He had to return home urgently. The protagonist was ready to accept the challenge and go to the show. There was a real commotion in the television studio. David, the chief director of entertainment programs, was shocked. The composition and program of the culinary competition were still in the development stage, but journalists had already published the list of participants. The executive assistant suggested trying to call Martin to invite him to the show. David knew in what condition the famous chef left town after numerous rumors. He was very worried about the guy and had not yet managed to contact him, doubting that the chef would want to become the object of unfounded criticism again. The upset boss's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. The producer jumped in surprise when he saw the subscriber's name. David took the phone with great excitement and greeted Martin. The assistant listened attentively to his senior colleague. He really wanted to watch the competition between two outstanding chefs. The director continued the conversation, his voice calm and friendly. After finishing the conversation, the young man was so excited that he couldn't speak for a few seconds. The star chef had no intention of suing the company over false information and confirmed his participation in the competition, agreeing to meet in a few days. The main character returned to the capital again. Martin walked to the meeting place that David had appointed for him. The producer personally came to pick up his old friend. The director thanked the chef for agreeing to perform at the competition. He could not believe his happiness and already began to think about raising the company's rating. The chef ordered his assistant to take the chef to a beauty salon as a gift before filming. Martin could not understand that David had decided to attract the attention of a wide female audience who liked the sweet face of the young master. All the TV studio staff and guests were eagerly awaiting the start of the competition. It was an anniversary show. Only 2 teams of cooks were participants. They included specialists of different levels and degrees of skill. Warren was confident of victory and gave instructions to his most junior colleague. Kevin, like his older friend, was surprised by the appearance of his main competitor. The young man was upset that he had participated in the preparation of a critical article about the famous chef. He did not expect that it would be published immediately. The team captain tried to calm the frightened newcomer. Warren said he paid reporters to conceal the source of the information. Suddenly, excited cries were heard in the studio. Kevin and his colleague looked around to see what was going on around them. The television workers happily greeted their idol. Martin looked rested and mature, which was immediately noted by everyone present. The opponents watched their competitor with dissatisfied faces. Warren was angry that his former friend didn't say hello to him. The main character was happily chatting with old friends whom he hadn't seen for several months. The young man calmly walked past the enemy, pretending not to notice him. Warren was angry that the young man ignored his presence. Martin calmly looked back at the shout and apologized for not recognizing his opponent, mistaking him for service personnel. The man was amazed by the young man's impudence and calmness. The protagonist knew that the person standing in front of him was the main source of gossip that was actively spread on social networks and was no longer afraid of him. Warren didn't understand why his opponent was so confident and accused him of arrogance, pointing to his pretty face and lack of skill. Martin tried to look calm as he listened to more nasty things being said about himself. Someone's hand fell on the shoulder of the famous chef. The young man's longtime friend Daisy greeted him. She used to be a singer. Dennis was her manager, so they lived nearby and often met. Everyone present looked with surprise at the friendly meeting between the young popular artist and the chef. The beauty was glad to see her old friend and wished him good luck. She believed in his talent. Kevin tried to calm the outraged team captain. The junior chef tried to get his boss out of the studio. It was the first time Martin saw the young chef who was constantly next to his main competitor. Daisy scolded the master for silently listening to gossip. However, the main character did not pay attention to his former friend. He was surprised that he once trusted this man and was poor at understanding people. The beauty calmed the guy down. He always thought only about cooking and did not notice those around him. The girl noticed that her friend had changed. She said goodbye and wished him victory. Daisy asked to defeat the enemy with her wonderful art. Martin was also pleased with the unexpected meeting. The command was given and filming of the anniversary culinary competition began. The hosts welcomed the guests and participants of the show, among whom were the best masters of the country. The theme of today's competition was dishes that can be enjoyed with family. The main character went to the balcony to better observe the progress of the competition. The competition was opened by young chefs who appeared on stage for the first time. Kevin participated in the first round from the opposing team. The young specialists began preparing their signature dishes. Martin watched as his colleague deftly handled the lamb. The opponent chose seafood and steaks. The main character knew how to cook almost all the products. The young man recalled how interesting it was to participate in various competitions. Due to time constraints, it was difficult to fully reveal his potential. Kevin noticed with horror that their main enemy was watching him. The master's eyes met and studied each other for a few seconds. The young specialist became confused and dropped some of the products on the floor. It was a big mistake, and Martin was watching to see how the young chef could handle the situation. Kevin couldn't calm down. His whole body began to shake. The young man tried to concentrate. It was time to fry the meat. The main character watched the young masters with interest. The young man felt eyes on him, fearing that the famous chef knew that it was he who, at Warren's request, prepared the article for which he was accepted into the competition. Kevin tried to continue working calmly. The young specialist wanted to look confident, although he was doing a very poor job of it. The cook knew that Martin saw all his mistakes from above. The young man envied the star master, who was in fact a virtuoso in his field. The opponent was already finishing the task. We had to hurry to meet the deadline. Kevin placed the steaks in the pan and started on the shrimp. The main character was upset. The rival completely forgot about the fire. By the time Kevin smelled the oil, it was already burning. The young master was in a hurry and made mistake after mistake. Martin already knew who would win in the first round. After the defeat, the upset young man sat in the hall. Kevin recalled with regret the jury's assessment of the results of his work. The top critic noted that the steak was terrible, raw inside, and the lobster was very tough. As a result of the competition, the other team won. Warren went on stage and scolded his younger colleague in front of everyone. The captain said that the young man had no culinary talent at all and disgraced him. Kevin was ready to cry. His competitor's calm voice surprised him. Martin walked up to the guy and offered him a drink, trying to support the newcomer. The young chef was not prepared for his dishes to be judged at a professional level. The main character praised the young specialist who did not run away and fought steadfastly until the end. The famous master wished the young man not to give up and left. Kevin was surprised by the pleasant conversation with a man he did not know at all and had heard a lot of bad things about. Several rounds passed. The jury was tired. Everyone was waiting for the battle between the two strongest chefs in the country. Daisy announced that Martin would be competing against Warren in the final round of the competition. Jessica has judged cooking shows on numerous occasions and was happy to see the star chef again, who had recently won numerous competitions, but then disappeared for several months, leaving all the prizes to be won by his former friend. The jury members knew how their colleague felt about the talent of the famous chef. She often cooked at home using his recipes. The girl couldn't hide her delight. She was interested in what Martin would surprise them with today. The country's top restaurant critics studied the competition closely. The time has come for the final duel between the two famous masters. Warren was a five-star restaurant chef and a frequent television personality. The main character has always loved to cook and entered the history of the culinary world as the youngest winner of the top 10 shows. David watched the handsome man with a sense of satisfaction, glad that he had managed to take him to a beauty salon. In order not to give rise to unnecessary conversations, the main character calmly put a cap on his head. The producer was shocked. The young man's hairstyle cost him a lot of money in order to attract girls' attention to his cute appearance. Martin was calm and completely confident. The young man quickly prepared the necessary utensils and spices. Then the main character prepared the sauce. At this time, Warren was also working on his work. The judges were watching closely to see what the famous chefs were going to surprise them with. The restaurant chef began to prepare an expensive dish of French cuisine, Chateaubriand, which was considered an elite beef product. The critic observed that foie gras, truffles, and Madeira sauce were then added, making it a serious bid to create a high-class dish called Tornados Rossini. Jessica was upset, worried about her pet. Warren was confident of victory. He was infuriated by the fact that his competitor agreed to fight him without having any taste. The evil chef was interested in what his rival was planning. Seeing what was happening at the next table, the famous chef was surprised. Martin worked calmly with a hammer. Thin slices of pork lay on a baking sheet. The young man decided to treat the jury to tonkatsu. The judge couldn't believe her eyes. It was a typical Japanese dish. The girl could not understand why the young man chose this particular menu. Jessica hoped the dish would be more presentable and would be easy to give a high rating. A large screen showed the jury and guests the process of preparing the products, and the entire country watched the final with bated breath. Warren looked at his opponent, not understanding what he was thinking. The restaurant chef decided that the young master had relaxed on vacation and forgotten about the competition that had taken place at the competition. The man continued to watch his opponent closely. Pieces of delicious steak were fried in special oil, spreading aromas throughout the studio. Warren was pleased that his competitor was so much lower in level and that the victory was so easy. The main character did not pay any attention to those around him. He added some spices to the pan. It was time to start frying. The color of the oil acquired a rich shade. Martin was pleased with the result. Everything worked out as he had planned. The main character took the meat, previously coated in specially prepared breadcrumbs, and lowered it into the frying pan. After a few minutes, the pieces were covered with a crust. The young man carefully took out the first portion. The pork was easy to cut and looked delicious. Martin took a bite to appreciate the results of his labor. David watched the progress of the competition closely from his office. The producer was initially scared when the young man told him that he wanted to cook tonkatsu. But now, watching the young man's reaction, he was completely confident in him. The main character was pleased with the result of the test. The program director thought that he hadn't seen Martin smile for a long time. Both chefs finished almost simultaneously. The workers took the dishes to hand them over to the jury for evaluation. The hosts invited the masters on stage to ask a few questions while the judges prepared for the auditions. Warren felt like the hero of the day, and he thought the cheap dish suited his opponent just fine. The restaurant chef teased his colleague by suggesting that he go on vacation again. The competitor's response silenced Warren. Martin agreed that it was living in the countryside that helped him prepare his dish. The presenter announced that Warren's work would be judged first, as he had completed the task a little faster. To fill the gap, the chef was asked to explain how his product related to the theme of family meals. The famous chef replied that his goal was to feed everyone the best he could, highlighting his talents. Daisy, in turn, asked what Martin could explain about the idea behind his dish. The main character thought for a moment and answered. The young man said that during his vacation he managed to meet different people who were glad to see him. The young man remembered another world whose representatives he could call friends. These were the neighbors and residents of the village where he opened the restaurant, who were close to him. He considered them his relatives. Martin said he thought about a large family, each member of which would be satisfied with the food prepared. That is why the young chef chose delicious meat that was deep fried. The presenters thanked the participants. It was time to announce the results of the competition. The first dish judged by the jury was Warren's culinary creation. The French cuisine was top-notch, a Rossini tornadoes. Jessica looked at the meat in surprise. It was the first time she saw this dish, which looked like food for rich people. The layers of liver steaks were surprisingly easy to cut into pieces. The master's work really looked gorgeous. The judges began to sample, thinking that they lacked business attire. Even a food reporter and the vice president of a chef's association praised the taste and presentation of the food. Warren listened with satisfaction to the praise addressed to him. Most of the judges liked the choice of ingredients and the professional skills of the master. The man reflected on the fact that he had made the right choice in choosing expensive products. The rival looked sarcastically at the young competitor who had prepared a cheap, everyday dish. However, the words of a restaurant critic changed the situation. Bernard said that of all the similar dishes he had eaten before, this was the least unique, not something for a warm family dinner. The expert suggested that the choice of an expensive menu was simply an attempt to show off. Martin was no stranger to the show and had often heard harsh words from critics. The presenters summed up the results. In total, Warren scored 88 points. Bernard was always strict with the competitors. He had no favorites. One of the high-ranking members of the jury tried to argue with her colleague, but he was not going to give high marks to uninteresting dishes, as a result of which all of today's participants had less than 90 points. It was time to start trying the second product that Martin had prepared. The tonkatsu portion looked more modest than the first option, but quite appetizing. The judges silently studied the presented dish, thinking that the young chef had come simply to have fun at the competition. The special reporter was amazed by the young chef's confidence and cut off a piece of pork. The judge put the meat in his mouth without much enthusiasm. The other members of the jury followed him, their eyes shining with amazement, and the studio fell silent. The restaurant critic was speechless. Jessica didn't hide her delight. She loudly praised the delicious cutlet. Everyone found something important for themselves in this ordinary dish. Some liked the crispy crust. Others admired the soft and juicy meat. The vice president of the association was amazed at the guy's professional abilities. The meat was sliced thinly, the 4 layers looking like one piece. The reporter praised the additional sauce that was served with the dish. Bernard noticed the presence of green chili peppers, which had a phenomenal ability to intensify flavor over time. The restaurant critic knew that the frying time had to be very precise, so that the special qualities of the spices did not spoil the meat. The head judge liked the new level of skill he saw in Martin. Jessica told the hosts that she calmed down even before the tasting when she saw both dishes. The first option seemed delicious to her, but it required a certain setting and a business suit. The main character listened attentively to the judge's speech. The competition was over, and Daisy was ready to announce the final results. As a result, Martin scored 96 points and was recognized as the best master of the anniversary show program. Although the teams ended up drawing overall, Warren was left very disappointed. The young chef looked at the screen with a smile. The chef of a five-star restaurant couldn't believe he lost. The man angrily attacked his rival, accusing him of cheating. Warren couldn't understand how an expensive fancy dish could be priced lower than ordinary street food. Martin's former friend began to suspect that the young man had deliberately agreed to participate in the competition, where everything was planned in advance. The operators urgently tried to turn off the sound. Warren thought the boy had come on the show specifically to get revenge on him. However, Martin was calm. He was sure that his senior colleague wanted to destroy him completely and reminded his rival of this. The main character has long understood who published the article with incriminating evidence and gossip. Television workers and journalists listened with interest to the conversation between the famous chefs. Daisy and her partner also wanted to know the truth. Those present gathered in the studio to hear the main news. Warren was frightened and denied his involvement in the release of the report. Martin didn't believe a single word his former friend said. In a few months, he hadn't changed at all and always tried to insult his colleague. The main character said that during his vacation he had regained his strength and he was absolutely not concerned about the opinion of his unscrupulous competitor. The young man shared his thoughts that all of Warren's actions and words speak to how bad he really is. The restaurant chef couldn't believe he had been exposed. In a rage, the man tried to stop the guy. Warren grabbed his opponent by the suit, trying to find out what he was better at. The villain promised to completely ruin Martin's career. The master did not stop shouting at the young man, accusing him of all sins. David arrived just in time. He was tired of listening to unfounded reproaches, and he calmly removed Warren's hand from his friend. The producer also knew who ordered the release of the incriminating evidence, which had a negative impact on the television company's ratings. The man denied his involvement and demanded proof. David was going to submit the materials to court for slander. Warren was very scared, but he was not going to give up. Kevin timidly confirmed that he had told the whole truth about the article to reporters. The young chef realized that he had made a big mistake at the request of his older friend in order to get into the competition and was now trying to help Martin. Warren couldn't believe he had been betrayed. Kevin apologized to the famous chef in front of everyone. The program director said the restaurant chef would no longer be able to appear on television. In addition, Warren has forever lost the title of the country's chief executive. Now everyone will know about his meanness. The TV studio workers and guests dispersed, leaving the former celebrity behind. The competition ended. David thanked Martin for his participation and apologized to him. The main character did not blame anyone. Thanks to gossip, he got the opportunity to leave the capital and become a better person. The famous chef looked at the schedule. It was time to return home to the village. The director suggested that he stay in show business. The young man was not ready to leave his friends. The producer understood that the star chef had not yet fully recovered from the previous attacks. However, Martin did not want to return to the capital for another reason. He liked his new life. David looked at the modest guy with disappointment. The main character looked back at the farewell. He did not know when he would come to the city next time. The program director had never seen the young man so happy before and wished him good luck. It was time to look into another world, which the young man had not been to for several days and had already begun to miss. Everything was different here. Huge hares with pumped-up muscles were jumping through the forests. The little birds made their sounds and were not afraid of people. The animals lived in harmony with each other. Even the cats looked different, although they still meowed. In another world, there was a life of its own, sometimes quiet and calm. The main character was glad that he once managed to get to this mysterious place. The day came when Martin was ready to share his knowledge of local spices with the beastmen. First, he decided to teach the culinary arts to the most talented of the tribe. Training several representatives proved more difficult than the young chef had expected. The students were more interested in the food itself than in its preparation, and the science was difficult for the young individuals selected by the leader to grasp. Martin understood that everyone was still far from using seasonings. First, they had to learn how to use fire correctly so as not to burn the meat. The main character, together with his tailed assistant, decided to start with the simplest skills, promising the students not to let them go home until they mastered the new science. Each of the 3 half-beasts received a piece of pork, and it was necessary to fry the meat a little in a frying pan. However, some managed to stick a piece into the fire. Martin scolded his charges, trying to explain how to complete the task correctly. Charlie helped his friend with a serious look and kept an eye on the pots. The wolf cub growled to express his displeasure and called the master. It would be easy to add other game to the pot along with the pork so that there would be more food. As soon as the main character turned away, chaos began. Only little Sasha quietly made a fire and was already throwing spices into the cauldron. Martin looked closely at the cat's actions. A fragrant broth was boiling in the saucepan. The cook noticed that the girl did everything he told her to do correctly. The little girl seemed very familiar to the young man. He remembered that it was she who won the honorary prize and received the title of leader of the hunters during his first visit to the village of beastmen. Sasha saw a teacher nearby and got scared. The main character praised the obedient student. The meat was cooked and looked very appetizing. Another student, who looked like a small puppy, began to reflect on the fact that the process of proper cooking takes a lot of time. The teacher did not let him continue the topic and put a piece of delicious pork in his mouth. Overall, the dish turned out well and was almost completely ready to eat. Martin put his glasses aside. It was time for the most important thing. The main character showed everyone a fruit that grew in the local forests. The kids were surprised to see the thornberry, which they often ate. Now the cook knew what this plant was called. The students had to learn how to cook delicious soup. The cook began to tell what products were needed for the soup. The dish was easy to prepare and you could add almost anything to it. The mysterious fruit combined the taste of tomato and basil, which made it very valuable in cooking. The students were happy that they often cooked soups at home and knew a little about how to prepare them. Martin decided to make the task more difficult. Now he had to get a score from the judges. The young man introduced the members of the jury. Strict Liam, who kept order, and the almost always hungry wolf cub were ready to take a sample. The students were a little scared by the teacher's decision. The young man prepared portions in advance and fed his friends so that the judges would know what the taste should be. Martin reassured the children, convincing them that their option would be better. It was time to start preparing a new dish. The teacher poured some oil into the frying pan and chopped the onion into it. After it turned golden, it was time to add the meat. Then add whatever vegetables you have available. The main ingredient is the thornberry, which needs to be peeled and placed in a frying pan. All that was left was to pour the bone broth over everything, add spices, and simmer for a bit. The resulting dish was very aromatic and looked attractive. Martin showed that making a delicious soup is very simple and gave the students time to complete the task. An hour later, the main character asked to present his pots to the jury. The students excitedly brought the prepared dishes. Liam eyed the first portion warily. Charlie also got some soup in his bowl. The wolf cub sniffed the air. The smell was not very bad, so he decided to try the soup. It turned out to be simply impossible to eat this portion. The oldest student was upset and tried to repeat everything the teacher told him. The next puppy-like novice held out a saucepan for testing. The soup tasted good, but Martin didn't have time to spit out the liquid and fell. The remains of the paralytic poison from the half-beast's claws ended up in the protagonist's mouth. Martin was upset, feeling like a bad teacher. Sasha brought her version last, and the young chef's only hope was on her. Liam immediately appreciated the pleasant smell of the dish. The chief's assistant calmly poured the entire portion of soup into his mouth. The main character and his student eagerly awaited the warrior's decision. Luna's bodyguard was pleased. He was completely satisfied with the nutritious soup. The soup was a little worse than the master's, but the taste of the thornberry was clearly felt. The girl was happy that she had completed the task. Charlie listened to the results and was also ready to destroy the soup. Sasha was glad that she was praised. Samantha appeared unexpectedly and greeted the man. The chief was pleased that Martin took several students from the tribe in order to choose the most talented one. The leader asked the girl to treat her to some of the prepared soup. Samantha was also pleased with the result and did not believe that the little girl had completed the task on her own. Moon's mother promised to repay the debt for the work, but Martin was happy to try to teach the beastmen how to cook and refused gratitude. The chief was adamant. She really wanted to thank the young man. The main character was still unable to rise after the poison had taken effect. The cook was glad that he could help the tribe. It was time to return to the village to continue working in the restaurant. As a token of gratitude, Martin had to take the gift that Samantha had prepared for him on behalf of all the beastmen. The bag of unfamiliar berries emitted an unpleasant smell. The cook, along with Charlie, could not stand the stench, wondering if it could be some kind of strange revenge and not daring to taste it. The bell alerted the restaurant owner that he had a customer. Martin heard a familiar voice and looked out of the kitchen. The artist greeted his young friend. This time he didn't come to eat alone. Mr. George introduced his friend. The strange man extended a shaking hand to the young man. Then Edward took the cook by the shoulders and began to shake him, noticing the guy's trained muscles. The man with a multi-day beard, who looked very much like a biker, was glad that his interlocutor was engaged in physical exercise. The main character looked at the guest in surprise. Suddenly, Edward took off his jacket and showed his biceps. The man boasted that he was also constantly pumping up his muscles, offering the guy to touch his strong muscles. The painter was surprised by his friend's behavior. The artist scolded Edward and made him get dressed. Mr. George apologized to the young man for his old friend's tactless behavior. Martin looked at the guests. They were completely different. It was unclear what could connect them together. The cook quickly prepared and brought the order to the customers. The young man was glad that he could practice Italian cuisine again. The artist commissioned a light pomodoro. Edward loved spices, so he chose arrabbiata. The cook warned the guests that the pasta was very spicy, as he requested. George didn't wait for his friend and started eating first. The biker closed his eyes in pleasure, feeling the hot pepper in his mouth. The sauce was special. It combined spicy and sweet taste. The dish looked magnificent, whetting the appetite of the diners. Edward was satisfied with the quality. The dish was the same as he had tried many times in Italy. The main character wished the guests a bon appetit and went to the kitchen. The painter's friend detained the owner and asked him to choose at random one of the days off in a couple of months. Martin was surprised but fulfilled the elderly stranger's wish. The chef asked what date it would be. Edward said in a calm tone that he planned to resign that day. The young man was shocked by the selection method and asked what the strange man who looked like an old biker did for a living. George intervened in the conversation. He knew that no one would recognize his friend. Edward Miller was a famous pianist for many years. The musician has toured the entire world and has repeatedly won various international competitions. The man masterfully performed melodies not only by famous composers, but also wrote his own works. This world-famous man was now sitting in Martin's restaurant. The main character couldn't believe his eyes. The stranger looked more like a bandit or a biker who played Beethoven only on the body of his motorcycle. Miller was also not surprised that he was not recognized. He had not appeared at concerts for a long time. The young man stood in a daze next to the visitors. Suddenly, he came to his senses. The young man remembered that he had known the musician for a long time. Martin's former boss was very fond of Edward and often played his compositions at work. The main character said that music and excellent performance helped him cope with the stressful workdays. The young man had a completely different idea of a person performing soulful compositions. George was upset for the owner of the establishment, whose opinion about the musician's image had changed so abruptly. The cook complimented him by saying that the pianist looked much cooler in real life and suggested that he cancel his resignation. Edward told the guy that he was going to put on one last performance, which was supposed to be the coolest one. The musician's grandiose plans were disrupted by problems with his hands, especially his right one. The hands became weak and did not obey the owner well. A slight tremor appeared. The doctors could not do anything about it. The protagonist listened to the visitor's confession with sympathy. The pianist canceled his performance and was simply about to leave the stage. Edward was very upset, but he understood that his popularity was in the past and he had to move on. The restaurant owner understood the guest's condition. The old friends ate and sat for a while in a quiet, cozy place. Before leaving, George thanked Martin for the delicious dishes. Edward thought with humor that you need to be friends with the cooks in order to always eat well. The artist asked his friend to wait outside. He needed to say a few words to the young man in private. When the door closed behind the pianist, the famous painter apologized once again for his strange behavior. The main character was not upset. He was glad to meet him, although he noticed that the musician lacked sophistication in life. George apologized for sharing Mr. Miller's health problems with Martin. The young man was happy. He thought Edward was amazing. The young man knew how difficult it could be and what feelings a person experiences when he has difficulties. The artist philosophically noted that not all plans in life come true. He and his friend learned to give up. An indignant pianist looked into the restaurant. He was tired of waiting for his friend. The main character said goodbye to his new friends and invited them to visit him more often. In the evening, Martin could not sleep for a long time, remembering the last words of the elderly painter. To distract himself from sad thoughts, the cook decided to do some cleaning. However, work could not calm the young man. The young man understood that the musician found himself in the same situation as he had recently, but he could not think of how to help him. Martin almost managed to overcome his problems by escaping civilization and meeting another world. The restaurant owner heard sounds from the hall and looked around. A dirty wolf cub was running across the freshly cleaned floor. It looked like he had recently been digging in the ground. The main character indignantly began to wash and dry the shaggy baby. Charlie licked his friend's hands gratefully. Martin thought about it, remembering the healing properties of the sacred beast's saliva. The young man came up with the idea that the wolf cub could cure the musician. At that very moment, the chef imagined that scientists would study the little animal and sell it to people. The cook couldn't give his friend over for experiments. The protagonist thought that he himself did not give up, so his abilities gradually recovered. Martin sat for a long time, thinking about his problems and the friends who helped him. The little-tailed baby listened attentively to his older friend. The young man was upset by the fact that the pianist was of mature age and therefore might not have time to realize his plans. The cook wondered what the musician's chances were if he recovered quickly. Charlie's whole demeanor indicated that this was unlikely. Suddenly, the wolf cub grabbed his friend by the leg and pulled him outside. Martin realized that he was being led somewhere. It was night. The main character was running after the baby along dark paths. Charlie stopped at the edge of the forest. It was clear that the ground had recently been dug. The shaggy friend quickly began to dig a hole. A few moments later, Samantha's gift appeared from the ground. The main character was shocked. He realized that the beast hid the berries because of the terrible smell. Martin helped his friend and pulled the bag out of the hole. The cook thought that the wolf cub had brought him here for a reason, although he knew that he would be scolded for his actions. Charlie looked at the master carefully as if trying to say something. The cook remembered that the chief of the beastmen said that her gift was a real treasure, although it had an unbearable smell. Martin thought again about Samantha's words. She mentioned that there was no such medicine in the human world. The protagonist carefully took one berry out of the bag to take a closer look. The skins opened up on their own like a flower, and the young man risked trying the core to taste, which was more reminiscent of an exotic fruit. The young man felt a wave of freshness pass through his entire body. The cook listened to his feelings. His body immediately felt light, as if he had just woken up. Martin thought that this fruit was also healing, just like the saliva of his four-legged assistant. Charlie barked happily, confirming his friend's thoughts. Now the cook understood what a treasure the leader of the tribe had given him. The problem that remained was how to give the magic potion to the musician so that he wouldn't ask about anything. The main character doubted that the pianist would eat an unfamiliar fruit with a terrible smell. It suddenly dawned on Martin that the core tasted very much like meat, so he could try making something edible. The smell can be neutralized with sauce and spices. The cook had to figure out where to put this fruit. The cook was once again amazed at the wonders that could be found in the other world. After trying out several options, the young man settled on ravioli. This dish could easily be seasoned with various spices to adjust the taste. The main character spent the rest of the night conjuring in the kitchen, and morning came. The unsuspecting famous musician was walking near his friend's villa and admiring the nature. Edward had almost resigned himself to the fact that his hands were constantly shaking, trying to hide them in his pockets. Clenching his fists tightly became a habit for the pianist. Suddenly, Mr. Miller heard his name. The restaurant owner and his furry friend were catching up with their new acquaintance. Edward was found thanks to Charlie's keen sense of smell. The musician was surprised that the young man decided to visit him himself, which meant he needed something. In response, the chef said that he had simply dropped in to visit and suggested having a bite to eat outdoors. The cook took out a container of food that gave off a fragrant smell. The pianist was surprised by the young man's unexpected offer. Martin once again offered the man something to eat. Edward could no longer refuse, feeling the wonderful aromas of the food. The main character opened the lid of the container. The ravioli were still warm and looked absolutely delicious. The musician thought that the young man decided to try out the new menu. Suddenly, Edward realized that his new friend was worried about him. The cook denied it. He just dropped by to visit with his treat. The day before, George had scolded his friend for letting the restaurant owner know about his problems, and now the musician was worried about it. Having finally decided that the last performance would not take place, the pianist took up the ravioli. Martin watched the sad Miller closely, realizing that he could not live without his instrument. The men sat on the grass and talked, admiring the local scenery. Edward admitted that he had not yet completely given up and that he really missed the piano. The musician wanted to say goodbye to everyone well at the last concert, but plans changed. The pianist understood that he would not be able to go on stage and disgrace himself. So Miller decided to quietly leave the music world. There was truly beauty all around. The birds were singing and the sun was shining brightly. The main character recalled his escape from show business. Martin said that he understood perfectly well the state of his interlocutor. However, the young man really wanted to hear the final chords of the famous pianist. The musician looked at the cook with distrust, surprised by his persistence. Edward thought that Martin was still too young to understand the situation. The man laughed. He had once been that young too. He liked the boy's energy. The main character became upset, thinking that he said something wrong. The pianist reassured his friend he really needed support. Martin was the only one who didn't think about giving up and tried to help. Edward understood everything and thanked the young man. While talking with an interesting interlocutor, the main character completely forgot to feed his furry assistant. While the young man was busy with his four-legged friend, the musician finally decided to try the treat and put the ravioli in his mouth. Edward immediately felt that something was happening to him. Knowing the celebrity's preferences, the main character specially added hot sauce, which helped to hide unnecessary odors and improve the taste of the medicinal fruit. The dough went perfectly with the juicy filling, and the food turned out to be absolutely non-fatty. Edward appreciated the chef's skill. After eating a few pieces, the pianist noticed that he felt better. The chef explained this by saying that his emotional background had improved. However, the musician noticed that even his fingers began to tremble less. The protagonist apologized and asked his new friend to take away some portions of ravioli. At parting, the chef said that the products could be put in the refrigerator to eat every day. When the young man left, Edward again listened to his feelings. My hands seemed to become a little stronger and didn't shake. The fingers obeyed the musician and worked fully, which had not happened for several years. A few days later, a moped pulled up to the restaurant. The main character heard the bell and was surprised. He hadn't had any visitors for a long time. Martin looked out of the kitchen and saw the postman. The man handed the owner of the establishment a small parcel. The young man looked at the thick envelope in surprise, noticing the sender's details. Charlie heard Edward Miller's name and went out to see his friend. The letter contained 2 tickets to the pianist's final concert. There was also a letter written in small handwriting enclosed in the envelope. The musician told his young friend that he had good news and was back in action. Martin learned that the pianist had returned to the capital, continued his treatment, and was preparing for a performance. At the end, it was said that Edward was very much looking forward to the young man at the grand final concert to play his music from beginning to end for his audience. The protagonist read a note thanking him for helping him make his dream come true. The four-legged friend listened to Martin, who read the letter out loud, pretending not to understand anything at all. There was a lot of traffic on the roads of the capital. People were rushing to work. Dennis was driving when he received a message from an old friend. Martin wrote that he had an extra ticket to a concert of a famous pianist. The manager was glad that they remembered him and was surprised that the prices for the musician's final performance were enormous. The young man was upset. He already had plans for this date, which he could not cancel. Dennis wondered which Miller fans he knew. The young man scrolled through his contacts and settled on one of their mutual acquaintances. Martin's friend dialed the number and waited for an answer. Hearing a familiar voice, Dennis was delighted and asked if the girl had any free time for the coming weekend. Daisy listened to her former boss with surprise. They hadn't spoken since she became an artist. At this time, the girl was relaxing in a cafe. She happily agreed to go to the concert of her idol. The long-awaited day of the famous musician's final performance has arrived. Martin was one of the first to arrive at the concert hall. A few minutes later, he was joined by an old acquaintance, whom they had hardly seen for several years, not counting the last cooking show where she was one of the hosts. Dennis, as usual, warned his friend at the last moment that he would send Daisy in his place. The beauty was glad to see the young man. She didn't know that he also loved to listen to music. Martin explained with embarrassment that he had only recently come to appreciate the pianist. Old friends remembered the times when they lived close by and often communicated with each other. Dennis was the older guy who usually always called the shots, despite the disapproval of those around him. Martin laughed. They really did have a good life. Daisy recalled the jokes they used to enjoy back then. The main character thought about it. He was very young then. The beauty noticed that the cook was not listening to her and called out to him. Unexpectedly, strangers approached the old friends. A stranger recognized the artist and asked her for an autograph. Martin first learned that his interlocutor was acting in TV series. He thought that she was continuing to sing. Daisy noted with humor that her friend in the distant village was completely behind the times. The main character looked at his friend in surprise, as if he was seeing her for the first time. The girl said that films with her participation are shown on all television channels. The young man apologized. He really hadn't watched TV for a long time. The beauty finished off her friend, scolding him for calling her a singer. Martin did not argue with the girl and silently waited for the performance to begin. Finally, the famous musician appeared on stage. Everyone looked at the famous person with delight. Many knew about his health problems and no longer hoped that they would see his virtuoso performance. Edward looked great. He had cut off his beard and immediately looked several years younger. The pianist bowed, greeting the numerous spectators. Daisy watched her idol with excitement. Like many, the beauty knew about the musician's illness and was surprised by his courage. The main character reassured his friend he was confident in Edward's success. Martin suggested that the girl relax and enjoy the music. The pianist sat down at his favorite instrument with excitement. It was as if my feet had automatically settled into familiar places so that I could press the right pedal in time. Miller paused for a moment, listening to the silence in the room. The fingers slowly moved towards the keys with a familiar movement. Beautiful music began to sound, and it seemed as if there was only a pianist and a piano in the whole world. Edward enjoyed the sounds of the melodies of the best pieces, which he included in the final performance. The main character was at a concert for the first time and enjoyed seeing how skillfully his older friend played the instrument. The musician continued playing without stopping, and the audience noticed that his hands were completely healthy. Daisy watched her favorite pianist with admiration. The final performance of the famous musician was brilliant. For a long time, the audience did not want to let their idol go. When everyone left, Edward met Martin in the hall. The pianist joyfully greeted his friend and his acquaintance. Daisy beat her friend, outraged that he had not warned her that he knew a celebrity. Miller was very interested in the impressions of the concert. The main character was delighted with the performance. The artist intervened in the conversation. He thought that his old friend had dragged out the ending. The men once again began to argue loudly, not paying attention to those around them. Martin didn't immediately recognize George. In a suit, he looked more formal and elegant. The young man tried to calm his friends, but the beauty could not believe that the famous painter was also his friend. The young man revealed a secret to his girlfriend. These men often visited his restaurant. The girl also wanted to know the address so she could become a regular and eat well. Daisy plucked up her courage and asked for an autograph. The beauty thought that today's performance was simply amazing and the best of all the previous ones. The musician thanked the young artist for her kind words. Edward did not reveal the circumstances that changed his decision. He simply looked at Martin silently. The main character pretended not to understand what the pianist was talking about. The musician was very pleased that he managed to make his dream come true. George remained silent. He also did not voice his strange assumptions out loud. At parting, the great pianist once again thanked his young friend for his help. The chef invited his friends to visit his restaurant more often. The next day, the main character went on a picnic again. Francis had long promised to show the young man fishing. Martin admitted that he had never fished before, but he liked to sit quietly on the shore and look at the fishing rod. Charlie was nearby, eagerly awaiting the catch. The protagonist asked the knight why they used thick ropes and tree trunks instead of regular fishing rods. The young man visited a specialized store in advance and bought the necessary equipment. Francis's answer was unclear. He said that fishing here is war. The fish in the reservoir are not very small, so the line will not cope. Martin did not understand the meaning of the words. After a few seconds, he noticed that the warrior's fishing rod began to tremble. The captain of the knights easily made a sweep and pulled the prey out of the water. A monster with fins and a tail covered the entire sky. The main character couldn't move from his place due to surprise. The young man watched as the huge carcass flew straight towards him. He had never seen such giants. Francis managed to save his friend, who was almost crushed by a local fish. The guard was pleased with the catch. Fresh fish was a delicacy. The monster with fins turned out to be not very fat and had almost no unpleasant smell. Now all that was left was to cut up the prey and prepare the food. The first thing to do was to make fish soup. Hot spices can make food even more aromatic and delicious. The man watched his young friend with surprise. Francis noted that the cook works much better with a kitchen knife than with a sword. Martin cleaned the carcass and cut it into pieces. The main character asked the knight what other fish were swimming in the local lakes. The guard said that the forest and the reservoir are located on the border of 3 races and have unusual energy. Now the cook understood why all the animals here were very big. He remembered the strange ostrich and the giant hare. Martin said that in the place where he lives, almost all the animals are not very big, and the rabbits are cute and fluffy. It was time to make a fire. The helpers went for firewood. The main character grabbed a large cauldron and was going to throw the bones into the water to make broth. The chef added a few ingredients, and the aromatic smell immediately spread throughout the entire shore. After half an hour, the soup was almost ready. Francis and Charlie stood by the fire and waited impatiently to try the delicious fish soup. The knight was ready to eat straight from the pot. Martin stopped his friend, who was drooling, in time. While the soup was boiling, the chef prepared sashimi. The guard looked with distrust at the appetizing pieces of raw fish, which were accompanied by several types of sauces. The friends sat down to dinner, and the soup turned out wonderful. To celebrate the catch, the men decided to drink an alcoholic beverage. Francis drank to the bottom, snacking on a Japanese dish. The picnic lasted all day. There was plenty of food and drink. The main character tried to understand what the local fish tasted like. The captain of the knights praised his friend, who was an expert in food products. Martin thought his abilities were fully restored. It seemed to him that his senses were even sharpened when he prepared ravioli for the pianist. The young man was glad that he came to the village and found himself in another world. The friends relaxed until the evening, telling each other different news and snacking on fresh fish while drinking alcohol. The protagonist barely remembered how night fell, and he found himself in his tent. Martin went outside to find water. He was tormented by thirst. The cook couldn't remember how many drinks he had drunk yesterday. His head was splitting into pieces. When it got dark, Francis suddenly remembered that he had promised his wife to return early and went home. The young man felt a fresh breeze and opened his eyes. Abigail stood on the shore of the lake and admired the nature. The elf greeted the man, noticing his unhealthy appearance. The main character was waiting for this meeting. He thanked the girl for the advice. Abigail was glad that she helped her new friend. Martin wanted to treat the girl, but he couldn't get to his feet. The guest looked at the guy with pity and refused to eat, but she also needed to find out something from the man. The elf said that ordinary people do not see the spirits of the elements. They have no connection with nature. So Na was the spirit of a girl who was not supposed to be seen by outsiders. The strange young man actually saw the bird, so Abigail thought there was some meaning to it. The elf offered Martin to make a contract with the spirit. For this, he simply needed to establish a certain connection, which he had to have if he saw mysterious creatures. The main character did not understand what was being discussed. In addition, the young man felt very ill after drinking alcohol, and he ran into the bushes. The fairy tale beast of the elves took the girl home. Morning came and Martin felt a little better. The young man met with the night guest and apologized for his behavior. The young man was upset that he had shown Abigail his worst side. Martin thought about the offer. He realized that spirits should always be near their partner, but he had a wolf cub who would be upset if the owner had another friend. Charlie looked at the cook pitifully and tried to say something. The look of the four-legged friend was very sad. The main character could not understand what his assistant was thinking. Suddenly, the chef had the idea that Charlie was lonely and wanted a younger brother. The young man looked at the elf and agreed with her proposal. The wolf cub tried to convince his friend that there was no need to summon the spirit, but the cook did not understand the signs of the tailed baby. Abigail was pleased. She hoped that the young man would meet a gorgeous protector and suggested that he change into a summoner costume to strengthen the connection. The main character felt a little uncomfortable in the strange outfit. Now he had to think about what kind of spirit he wanted, his abilities, hobbies, and even age. This reminded the young man of a dating site. The elf began the ritual. The fireflies began to circle around the main character. He anxiously tried to formulate his wishes. The connection was established. His personal spirit of the elements flew from above to Martin.